Before our kind became the only humans left, Earth was not a world of one human story. It was a quieter, stranger place, shared by other human beings who walked upright, shaped stone, found shelter, endured cold nights, and left behind traces that still make us pause. Some looked close enough to recognize. Some were distant enough to feel almost unreal. Their lives were not myths, but their world is mostly gone. Bones remain. Tools remain. Questions remain. Who were the mysterious humans who lived before us? Before our kind became the only humans left, Earth was not a world of one human story. It was a quieter, stranger place, shared by other human beings who walked upright, shaped stone, found shelter, endured cold nights, and left behind traces that still make us pause. Some looked close enough to recognize. Some were distant enough to feel almost unreal. Their lives were not myths, but their world is mostly gone. Bones remain. Tools remain. Questions remain. Who were the mysterious humans who lived before us? To begin with them, it helps to let go of a simple picture that many of us carry without noticing. We often imagine human history as a single line, moving from darkness into light, from primitive beginnings toward the familiar shape of modern people. In that picture, there is one road, one kind of human traveler, and one clear ending: us. But deep time does not seem to have worked in such a clean way. Long before cities, writing, fields, and remembered names, the world held more than one human presence. The ground was not empty until Homo sapiens arrived. The firelit edges of caves, the open grasslands, the wooded valleys, the dry riverbeds, and the cold stone shelters may have belonged, at different times and in different places, to other humans as well. They were not animals in a simple sense, and they were not us in a simple sense either. They stood somewhere close to the beginning of what we call human, yet they remind us that the beginning was not a single doorway. It was more like a wide, uneven landscape, with several paths crossing, fading, and continuing into places we can only partly see. That is why their mystery is not only about missing facts. It is about the shape of our own story. If other humans lived before us, and sometimes near us, then being human was once broader than the single surviving form we know today. The familiar face in the mirror becomes less isolated. The hand that reaches for warmth, the mind that searches for meaning in the dark, the body that needs shelter and company, all of it begins to sit inside a much older and more crowded world. Yet that world did not leave behind voices. It did not leave behind songs we can hear, names we can pronounce, or memories passed down in ordinary language. It left stone flakes, worn teeth, broken skulls, footprints hardened in old mud, cut marks on bone, and traces of ancient DNA where preservation allowed it. From these quiet remains, scientists build careful pictures, always aware that the picture is incomplete. A jaw may suggest a diet. A hand bone may suggest grip. A skull may hint at brain size or face shape. A tool may show repeated skill, but none of these things alone can give back a full life. They do not tell us what a child saw when the fire faded, what an elder remembered during a long winter, or how a small group understood the boundary between safety and danger. The mystery begins there, in the space between the evidence that is real and the inner life that has vanished. These humans lived in the same deep world from which our own lineage emerged, a world of changing climates, shifting forests, expanding grasslands, ice, drought, hunger, migration, and fragile groups depending on bodies, memory, and each other. Some were shaped by cold regions, some moved across great distances, some survived on islands, some are known mostly from bones, and some almost more from genetic traces than from faces. To speak about them honestly, it is better not to make them monsters, heroes, or missing links in a simple ladder. They were populations of living beings, with bodies adapted to their time and with limits set by the environments around them. They were born, grew tired, healed from wounds when they could, searched for food, avoided danger, and died under skies that no longer look exactly the same. Their existence makes the earliest human story feel less like a straight road and more like a dim plain at night, where several fires once burned at different distances. One fire remained bright enough to reach us. Others went out, or perhaps merged with ours in ways still being studied. What matters, at the beginning, is not to decide too quickly what they were. It is to understand that before our written past, before nations, before farms, before the first remembered kings, the human world was already layered. We are the last visible branch of a much older family of forms, experiments, survivals, and losses. And when the other branches are seen only through fragments, the question becomes quieter, but also deeper. What kind of world existed when being human did not yet mean only being us? One of the quietest changes in how we see the past is the realization that the word human was not always as narrow as it feels today. In the present, there is only one living kind of human on Earth. Every face, language, village, city, and child learning to walk belongs to Homo sapiens. Because of that, our minds easily turn the present into the rule. We look backward and imagine the same loneliness stretching into deep time, as if there was always one human form moving through the world, slowly becoming us. But the older record suggests something less simple. The human family was not a single clean line. It was a branching history, with populations appearing, changing, moving, mixing, and disappearing across long stretches of time. Some branches are known from many bones. Some are known from only a few. Some have names that sound firm, though the evidence behind them is still discussed. Others may have vanished without leaving enough for science to recognize them clearly. This does not make them imaginary. It means the past is larger than the remains that survived. When we speak of mysterious humans who lived before us, we are not speaking of fantasy beings, hidden outside history. We are speaking of real populations whose bodies belong to the same wide evolutionary beginning that eventually produced us, but whose full lives are beyond recovery. Their mystery comes from nearness and distance at the same time. A fossil skull can look close enough to disturb the boundary between them and us, while a heavy brow, a different jaw, or a differently shaped body reminds us that their path was not identical to ours. A stone tool can feel familiar because it was made by a hand with intention, yet strange because the mind behind it left no spoken explanation. This is where the idea of being human becomes slow and difficult. It cannot be reduced only to brain size, tool-making, walking upright, fire, language, burial, art, or migration. Each matters, but none alone can hold the whole meaning. Near the beginning of our story, humanity was not a finished object. It was a changing set of bodies and behaviors shaped by earth, climate, food, danger, and time. The first people like us did not step into a world divided neatly into human and non-human. They came from a long background of earlier hominins. Many adapted to landscapes that had already been testing bodies for millions of years. Long legs, free hands, flexible diets, social learning, endurance, memory, and tool use grew where survival was never guaranteed. The mysterious humans before us were not simply failed versions of ourselves. That way of thinking is too straight, too modern, and too proud. Some survived for astonishing lengths of time. Some adapted to cold. Some endured forests, islands, highlands, or open grasslands. Some may have met our ancestors directly. Some may have lived far away in place or time. Their existence shows that nature did not build one inevitable road toward the present. It tried many human ways of being alive. The problem is that we see these ways through a broken window. We find stones scattered on old ground. We find teeth worn by food and grit. We find bones in caves, river deposits, ash layers, and ancient sediments. We compare shapes. We date layers when conditions allow. We read molecules when they have not decayed beyond use. From this, a careful outline appears, but the inner colour is missing. We may infer what they ate, how they moved, or whether their bodies were built for heat, cold, climbing, walking, or strength. Yet the ordinary texture of their days remains silent. Morning warmth, hunger, fear of injury, another body nearby, the memory of a path to water. These things were central to life, but they rarely fossilize. So the question is not only how many kinds of humans once existed, it is how much human experience disappeared before language, writing, and memory could hold it. To approach them honestly, we have to stay close to the evidence and also admit the silence around it. The deeper we move into the human past, the less the story behaves like a straight line. It begins to look more like a landscape seen through morning fog. Some shapes are clear for a moment, then fade. Some stand close enough to seem familiar, yet far enough away that we cannot step fully toward them. This is why the mysterious humans before us matter so much. They do not simply add a few strange names to prehistory. They change the way the whole beginning feels. If our species were always alone, then the story would be easier to hold. There would be one kind of human body, one slow rise, one path through stone tools, fire, language, migration, and memory. But if other humans lived, struggled, learned, adapted, and disappeared, then our past becomes wider than our imagination usually allows. It means the human world once had more forms than the ones still breathing today. Some of those forms may have been close relatives. Some may have been distant cousins. Some may be known only through fragments that are too small to give us certainty, but too real to ignore. This makes the beginning of humanity feel less like a single birth, and more like a long, uneven unfolding across different climates, bodies, and ways of surviving. In that older world, a human figure by a fire did not always have to be one of us. A hand-shaping stone did not always belong to Homo sapiens. Footprints in old ground, bones in cave sediment, and tools buried under layers of earth can point to lives that moved through the same planet, but not always through the same destiny. The quiet force of this idea is that it removes our species from the center of every scene. It asks us to imagine a world where we were not yet the only answer. The forests, plains, coastlines, highlands, and cold valleys of deep time may have held several versions of human life, each shaped by its own pressures. A body built for cold tells one story. A body adapted to long movement tells another. A small population on an island tells another still. None of these stories can be reduced to simple failure, because extinction is not always proof that a life was weak. Sometimes the environment changes. Sometimes numbers become too small. Sometimes groups mix. Sometimes the evidence disappears before we ever find it. At the root of our own beginning, survival was never guaranteed by intelligence alone. It depended on food, water, shelter, birth, injury, disease, weather, cooperation, memory, and chance. The mysterious humans before us lived inside those same hard limits. They did not know they were becoming evidence. They did not know that one day a tooth, a skull fragment, or a piece of worked stone would carry their existence across tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. They lived forward, as all living beings do, with no knowledge of what would remain. This is why they are so difficult to speak about with honesty. If we say too little, they become dry fossils. If we say too much, we begin to invent them. The careful path is to stay close to what the ground has given us, while allowing the silence around the evidence to remain. A broken bone can show age, injury, or shape. A tool can show skill. A hearth can suggest repeated return to a place. Ancient DNA, when it survives, can show relationships that bones alone could not reveal. But a life is more than what survives in stone and bone. A life includes fear, sleep, hunger, closeness, attention, learning, and the feeling of belonging to a small group in a large world. Those things rarely leave clear marks. They vanish first. So when we ask who these humans were, we are also asking what has been lost from the first long history of being human. We are asking how many ways of living almost reached us, then fell silent. We are asking whether our own species is the final shape of a clean design, or simply the only remaining witness of a much broader family. The answer cannot be rushed. It has to begin with the humility that our human world was once larger than us, and that the beginning of our story may be filled with people whose names, faces, and voices are gone, while the fact of their existence still waits quietly under the earth. The first thing that usually reaches us from earlier humans is not a face, not a name, and not a story told by their own people. It is often something small and damaged, a tooth, a piece of skull, a jawbone, a thigh bone, a fragment of a hand. These remains do not arrive with explanations. They are lifted from cave floors, river terraces, ancient sediments, volcanic layers, or dry landscapes where time has hardened around them. At first glance, a fossil can seem too still to matter. It has no voice, no warmth, no movement left in it. But when a scientist turns it in the hand, the past begins to lose its simple shape. A tooth may show a way of chewing. A jaw may hold clues about diet, growth, or relationship to other groups. A skull fragment may suggest a face that was not quite ours, yet not entirely foreign. A leg bone may carry the memory of walking, distance, weight, and balance. From such pieces, the idea of other humans becomes less like a distant theory and more like something that once stood upright under the same sky. The evidence is physical and real, but it is rarely whole. We are not looking at complete worlds. We are looking at remains that survived by chance. Most bodies returned to the soil without leaving anything readable. Most camps vanished. Most footsteps were erased by wind, rain, animals, roots, and later human lives. Even where bones are found, they may represent only a few individuals from a population that lived for thousands of years. Every fossil is powerful but also limited. It can open a door, but it cannot become the entire room. Near the beginning of our human story, this matters deeply, because the difference between one kind of human and another may be preserved in small anatomical details. The thickness of bone, the shape of teeth, the angle of a face, the size of a brow ridge, the curve of a femur, the form of a pelvis or hand. These details may sound dry, but they are the quiet grammar of survival. A body is not only a shape, it is an answer to conditions. It tells us something about movement, food, climate, childbirth, injury, strength, and the limits a population lived within. Yet a body can also mislead when we ask too much from it. Bones change with age, individuals vary, populations overlap, fossils break, sediments move. Old classifications can be revised when new evidence appears. So the story of mysterious humans before us is not built from certainty piled on certainty. It is built carefully, from comparisons, dates, contexts, and cautious interpretation. This caution does not weaken the mystery. It makes it more honest. Imagine a cave where a skull fragment rests for tens of thousands of years in darkness. Outside, climates warm and cool. Forests spread, retreat, and return. Animals migrate. Rivers shift. Our own ancestors move through other regions, sometimes near, sometimes far away. The person whose bone remains did not live as a specimen. They belonged to a group. They had a body shaped by inheritance and environment. They may have known paths, dangers, seasons, and other faces. But when we meet them now, we meet them through the hardest leftovers of life. The soft parts disappeared first. Skin, breath, gesture, expression, sound. Then the places of daily life faded. What stayed was mineral, tooth enamel, stone, and sometimes a mark cut into bone or ash left from fire. This is why one small fossil can disturb the whole story. It reminds us that the first long history of humanity was not written by people sitting down to explain themselves. It was written accidentally by survival and decay. Every fragment asks us to slow down. It asks whether this person was one of us, close to us, before us, beside us, or from a branch that ended without leaving descendants we can clearly trace. And because the answer is often incomplete, the bone does something unusual. It gives proof without giving closure. It lets us know that another human presence was real, while keeping most of that presence hidden from us. If a fossil could speak, it would probably tell us far less than we hope. It would not describe the sound of rain outside a shelter, the smell of smoke on skin, or the faces gathered near a small fire at the end of a cold day. It would not explain what frightened its people, what they recognized as danger, how they learned a path to water, or how they understood another body sleeping close beside them. Instead, it would remain silent, offering only its shape. That silence is one of the greatest challenges in understanding the mysterious humans who lived before us. Every fossil carries information, but every fossil also hides an entire lifetime. A tooth may preserve wear from food and grit. A jaw may suggest how a face was built. A skull may hold clues about growth, ancestry, and difference. A leg bone may remember walking through its thickness and angle. But none of these remains can return the whole person. This is why the study of ancient humans often moves in small, patient steps. A newly discovered tooth may be compared with hundreds of others. A finger bone may reveal proportions that seem familiar in one way and strange in another. The curve of an inner ear, the shape of a brow, or the pattern of wear on molars can slowly change how researchers understand an ancient population. These details are not dramatic by themselves, but together they can disturb a simple history. They remind us that near the beginning of the human story, bodies were not fixed into one final form. They varied across time, place, climate, diet, movement, and inheritance. The difficulty is that no ancient population was perfectly uniform. People today differ in height, face shape, bone strength, and body size, and earlier humans almost certainly varied too. Age changes the skeleton, injury can reshape bone, disease can leave marks, nutrition can influence growth. Even the earth can damage a fossil before it is found, pressing, cracking, dissolving, or moving it away from its original place. For that reason, scientists do not usually build a whole human story from one feature alone. They look for patterns. They ask where the bone was found, how old the surrounding layer may be, whether tools or animal bones were nearby, and whether the environment suggests forest, grassland, cave, shoreline, cold steppe, or dry open country. This careful process matters because the deep beginning of humanity was not recorded by people who could explain themselves. It survives because geology accidentally became an archive. A cave may protect fragile bones, volcanic ash may help date a layer, dry ground may slow decay. In other places, everything disappears. Whole groups may have lived, raised children, migrated, learned, suffered, and died without leaving a single fossil that reaches us. That thought changes the way we imagine our origins. The fossil record is not a complete family album with only a few missing pages. It is closer to a quiet library after most of its books have been lost. The surviving pages are precious, but they cannot tell every story that once existed. Between one fossil site and another, thousands of years may be almost silent. Entire regions may still hide evidence under forests, deserts, river sediments, or the sea. Some evidence may never be found at all. This uncertainty is not a failure. It is the nature of deep time. Honest science does not fill every empty space with confident invention. It lets some questions remain open until stronger evidence appears. That is why these ancient humans continue to feel so mysterious. Their mystery does not come from legend. It comes from incompleteness. We know enough to understand that they truly lived. We know enough to see that they were not simply us, and not completely outside the human story either. But we do not know enough to follow them from morning to night. We cannot hear their voices. We cannot ask how they understood the land around them. We cannot know what a parent hoped for a child, or what an elder remembered when the cold season returned. Every fragment of bone narrows the silence a little, but never removes it completely. It shows that before recorded history, many human lives unfolded across the same earth, leaving only enough behind for us to understand that our beginning was richer, stranger, and more crowded than it first appears. A bone can prove that someone lived, but it cannot easily tell us what it meant to be that someone. This is why the mysterious humans before us remain so powerful in the mind. They are not imaginary, because their remains can be measured, dated, compared, and placed within real landscapes. Yet they are not fully reachable either, because the remains do not open into complete memory. A tooth in a cave may belong to a child, an adult, or an old individual whose life was once filled with ordinary needs. A skull fragment may have once carried a face turned toward firelight, wind, another person, or a dark entrance to shelter. A hand bone may have belonged to someone who held stone, wood, hide, food, or the body of another member of the group. But when the soft life is gone, the evidence stands alone, hard and quiet. The strange feeling comes from this double truth. They were real enough to touch the ground, but distant enough that almost everything human about them has slipped away. Near the beginning of our own story, this is especially important, because the first traces of human life were not preserved to satisfy our questions. They were preserved by accident. A body had to fall in the right place. Sediment had to cover it. Water, animals, heat, roots, and time had to spare it. Later, someone had to find it, recognize it, and understand its possible meaning. For every fossil that enters a museum drawer, countless others were destroyed or never formed at all. This means the record of earlier humans is not only incomplete, it is uneven. Some places speak loudly because their conditions protected bone. Other places remain almost silent, not because no one lived there, but because nothing survived well enough to speak for them. A cold cave, a dry basin, a deep layer of sediment, or a limestone chamber may protect the past better than a wet forest or an open plain. So the map of ancient humanity is partly a map of survival and partly a map of preservation. What we find is shaped not only by where people lived, but by where evidence could endure. That should make us cautious whenever we imagine the world before us. Absence of evidence is not always evidence that no one was there. A whole population may pass through a region and leave only stone tools, or no clear trace at all. Another group may be known from a few bones found in one place, even if their actual range was wider. This is why each discovery can change the atmosphere of the entire story. A new jaw, a finger bone, or ancient DNA from a cave floor can quietly move the boundary of what scientists thought they knew. The mysterious humans before us live in that shifting boundary. They force the history of our origins to remain open, not in a careless way, but in a disciplined way. The evidence asks us to see them as living beings without pretending we can restore everything. Their bones tell of bodies under pressure. Their teeth tell of food, growth, and wear. Their tools tell of repeated action, learning, and contact with the physical world. Their locations tell of cold valleys, warm regions, islands, highlands, caves, rivers, and long migrations. But the most delicate parts of life do not fossilize. Trust, fear, attention, grief, teaching, comfort, and memory usually vanish without a mark. Even when we find signs of care, injury, or repeated occupation, we must speak carefully, because the evidence can suggest possibilities more easily than it can reveal inner meaning. This carefulness is not a way of making the story weaker. It is what keeps the story true. The people before us do not need exaggeration to be astonishing. It is enough that they existed. It is enough that they walked through landscapes older than our languages, faced seasons we cannot remember, and left behind fragments that still disturb the idea that humanity was ever simple. Their mystery is not a locked secret waiting for one perfect answer. It is a quiet distance between proof and experience. The bones remain. The lives are gone. And in that space, the earliest human world becomes both more real and more unreachable. Long before our species became the only human presence on Earth, one older human form cast an unusually long shadow across the deep past. Homo erectus did not appear as a brief experiment, flicker for a moment and vanish from the record. Its story stretches across an immense span of time, far longer than recorded history, far longer than farming, and far longer than the cities that now make us feel permanent. To think about Homo erectus is to step into a world where the human beginning was already moving, already walking, already adapting to distance. This matters because the mysterious humans who lived before us were not all fragile side notes at the edge of our own rise. Some were deeply successful in their own time. Homo erectus, or closely related forms depending on how particular fossils are classified, is often understood as one of the first human relatives to spread widely beyond Africa. That movement alone changes the atmosphere of the story. It means that before Homo sapiens crossed continents and filled coastlines, another human body had already met many landscapes. Open grasslands, wooded regions, river corridors, dry ground, changing climates, and unfamiliar animals. The world was not waiting for us to begin the human journey. A different kind of human had already taken long steps into it. The body of Homo erectus helps explain why this feels so important. Compared with some earlier hominins, many Homo erectus fossils suggest a body more committed to life on the ground, to walking and perhaps moving over long distances. Longer legs, a more human-like body plan, and a strong frame point toward a creature that could travel through broad landscapes with a different relationship to space than smaller, more tree-adapted ancestors. We should speak carefully, because fossils vary, and not every individual or population fits one simple picture, but the general impression is powerful. Here was a human relative whose life was no longer confined to a narrow corner of the world. Near the beginning of our own deeper story, this is one of the great shifts. The human body became a travelling body. Hands were no longer used mainly to support movement. They were increasingly free to carry, shape, hold, strike, gather, and perhaps pass knowledge from one generation to another. A stone tool lying in ancient sediment is not only an object, it is the trace of a hand meeting a problem. It may have opened food, cut flesh, worked wood, scraped hide, or changed the way a group survived a hard day. With Homo erectus, stone tools and movement become part of a wider human pattern. Not a sudden leap into modern thought, but a slow expansion of what a human-like body could do in the world. Yet the mystery remains. We can see the bones, we can see some tools. We can map sites across large regions, but we cannot watch them choose a path at dusk. We cannot know exactly how they recognized one another, how they learned, what sounds they made, or how much their social lives resembled ours. It is tempting to make them either too primitive or too modern. Both mistakes flatten them. They were not us wearing older faces. They were also not empty bodies moving without awareness. They lived in groups, faced danger, needed food, endured injury, and occupied landscapes where memory would have mattered. A river crossed in the wrong place, a dry season arriving early, a predator near sleeping ground, a lost tool, a sick child, a shift in animal movement. These were not abstract pressures. They were daily realities for any ancient human population. Homo erectus forces us to widen the first chapter of humanity, because its success was not built on writing, farming, metal, or cities. It was built on bodies, movement, endurance, tools, and repeated survival across time so deep that ordinary imagination struggles to hold it. Their long presence suggests that being human was already becoming something restless before we arrived. Not only a matter of intelligence, but of living through changing ground, carrying knowledge in bodies and habits, and finding ways to remain alive where the world offered no permanent home. When we look at Homo erectus, we are not looking at a failed version of ourselves. We are looking at one of the earliest long shadows of the human condition, a being close enough to belong to our wider family, distant enough to remain strange, and important enough to remind us that the road before us had already been walked. To understand Homo erectus, it helps to imagine not a single heroic figure crossing a map, but a long chain of ordinary bodies moving through ordinary needs. A group follows water. Another stays near a place where stone can be broken into useful edges. A dry season changes where animals gather. A child has to be carried. Food is found, shared, lost, or defended. Night comes, and the open ground becomes less safe. In this slow world, the body mattered before anything else. Homo erectus appears in the record with a form that seems, in broad terms, more committed to walking on two legs across land than many earlier ancestors. The legs were long enough to change distance into a different kind of problem. The hands were free enough to carry things that survival might depend on. The torso and hips suggest a creature no longer shaped mainly for moving through trees, but for life on the ground, where heat, thirst, injury, and distance could decide whether a group continued. This does not mean Homo erectus was simply modern in an older skin. That would be too easy. Their skulls, faces, brains, and bodies were different from ours in important ways, and the fossils placed under this name or close to it vary across regions and time, but their presence still marks a deep shift in the human beginning. Here was a human relative whose body could meet open landscapes with persistence. That matters because much of early human survival was not about sudden brilliance. It was about repetition. Walking again, finding water again, remembering a place again, breaking stone again, teaching, perhaps not through words as we know them, but through watching, doing, correcting, and repeating. A tool edge carries more than sharpness. It carries a pattern that was learned. To make stone useful, a hand must understand force, angle, texture, and result. Even a simple flake is not random when it is made again and again across many places. It suggests that the physical world was being read by the body. Stone could become an edge, bone could be opened, meat could be cut, plants, wood or hides may have been worked, though softer materials usually vanish. Near the root of our own story, this is one of the most important changes. The environment was no longer only endured. It was partly transformed by hand, tool, memory, and movement. Homo erectus also lived in a world where climate did not stay still. Over the immense time linked to this ancient human form, habitats shifted. Grasslands expanded and contracted. Forest edges changed. Wet places became dry. Animal communities moved. Survival in such a world required flexibility, but not the kind of flexibility we associate with modern cities or written plans. It was bodily and local. It lived in roots, seasons, food sources, social bonds, and the ability to keep going after difficulty. The mystery is that we can see the outline of this life, but not the feeling of it. We can measure bones and compare tools, but we cannot enter the fatigue of a long day's walk, or the relief of reaching shade, or the attention required to keep a small group together where danger was never abstract. We should be careful with fire, because the control and regular use of fire in early human history is a complex subject, and evidence varies by place and time. But even without pretending to know every detail, we can understand the importance of warmth, protection, cooking when it became reliable, and gathering in safe places. A body like Homo erectus did not live as a fossil category. It lived as hunger, movement, repair, fear, rest, and contact with others. The bones point towards strength and travel, but the full life was made of smaller things: a foot placed on uneven ground, a hand holding a stone, eyes watching animals in the distance, a group deciding whether to stay or move. This is why Homo erectus feels less like a distant name and more like a long shadow at the edge of our own existence. Their bodies were not identical to ours, yet they had already entered one of the oldest human conditions: to survive by carrying the world in memory, by shaping matter with the hands, and by moving through landscapes that never promise safety. The remarkable thing about Homo erectus is not simply that this ancient human existed. It is that this way of being human endured for an extraordinary length of time. Entire civilizations that seem ancient to us lasted only a tiny fraction of that span. Kingdoms rose and disappeared. Languages formed and vanished. Mountains slowly changed shape. Through immense stretches of deep time, populations classified as Homo erectus or closely related groups continued to survive in changing environments. That fact alone encourages a different way of thinking about the beginning of humanity. We often assume that evolution is a constant race toward improvement, as though every earlier human was merely waiting to become us. Yet the evidence does not fit such a simple picture. A population that survives across hundreds of thousands of years is not a failed experiment. It is evidence that its members possessed bodies and behaviors capable of meeting the demands of their world. Their success should not be measured by whether they eventually became Homo sapiens. It should be understood within the landscapes they actually inhabited. The beginning of the human story was never about moving toward one perfect destination. It was about finding enough balance between body and environment to survive another season, another generation, another age of changing climate. This is perhaps the first great lesson offered by Homo erectus. Being human did not begin with modern technology or modern thought. It began with adaptation. The body learned before civilization did. Feet learned distance before roads existed. Hands learned to shape stone long before they shaped metal. Memory learned the rhythm of rivers, dry seasons, migrating animals, and familiar shelters long before writing preserved any of those experiences. Every successful generation depended upon knowledge carried inside living people rather than inside books. That knowledge disappeared whenever the people disappeared. Yet some of it continued through imitation, shared practice, and the slow passing of habits from one generation to the next. In that sense, Homo erectus reminds us that the roots of culture may be much older than permanent settlements. Not culture in the modern sense of cities, monuments, or written traditions, but culture as repeated behavior that helped groups remain alive. The exact nature of those behaviors can only be inferred cautiously, but repeated patterns in stone technology, movement across landscapes, and long-term survival suggest lives that were shaped by learning rather than instinct alone. This ancient human also changes another assumption that many of us carry without noticing. We tend to imagine that the deeper we travel into the past, the simpler life becomes. Yet, simplicity can be misleading. The physical world faced by Homo erectus was demanding in ways that cannot be measured by technology alone. A changing climate required adjustment. Food could disappear with shifting seasons. Large animals could become both opportunity and danger. Water sources changed. Injuries threatened survival where no permanent shelter or medicine existed. Living through such conditions for immense spans of time required solutions that fit the realities of those environments. Those solutions were not identical to ours, but they were solutions nonetheless. This perspective prepares us for the larger journey ahead. Homo erectus was not the last of the mysterious humans before us, nor was it the closest to our own species. Other human populations would appear, spread into different regions, develop distinctive bodies, and leave behind different traces. Some would eventually live alongside Homo sapiens for periods of time. Some may even have exchanged genes with our ancestors. But before we reach those later encounters, Homo erectus quietly establishes something essential. Humanity was already diverse long before we became the only surviving human form. There was never a moment when one ancient human simply handed the world to the next in perfect sequence. Instead, the human family grew like the branches of an old tree, with some limbs expanding for remarkably long periods, others ending early, and still others crossing in ways that science continues to investigate. Standing at the edge of this older landscape, Homo erectus appears less as a distant curiosity, and more as the first long companion on the road toward understanding ourselves. Looking at these ancient bones, we are not simply asking what they became. We are asking what they reveal about the beginning of being human itself. The answer, at least for now, seems quieter than many expect. To be human was never defined by one perfect body, one perfect mind, or one inevitable future. From the very beginning, it was defined by the ability to endure an uncertain world, and Homo erectus reminds us that this ancient human condition had already taken shape long before our own species became the last one left to carry it forward. Neanderthals are often the first ancient humans who make the past feel uncomfortably close. Homo erectus stands far back in deep time, like a long shadow at the beginning of the road. Neanderthals stand nearer to the doorway of our own world. They lived in parts of Europe and Western Asia for a long time before disappearing, and for parts of that time our own species existed elsewhere and eventually entered some of the same broad regions. This nearness changes the feeling of the story. With Neanderthals, the mysterious humans before us are no longer only distant shapes known from scattered bones and old tools. They become almost recognizable. Their faces were different from ours, but not impossible to imagine as human. Their bodies were powerfully built, often described as stocky and strong, with features that seem suited to cold environments. Shorter limbs compared with many modern human populations, broad bodies, large noses, and heavy bones. These traits should not be turned into a simple costume of ice and hardship, because Neanderthals lived across varied landscapes and long spans of time. Still, the general image is clear enough to feel grounded. These were humans adapted to a demanding world of cold phases, shifting climates, open steppe, wooded valleys, caves, cliffs, rivers, large animals, and seasons that could test every body in a group. Near the beginning of our own story, they remind us that being human was not only a matter of thought, it was also a matter of muscle, breath, heat, injury, hunger, and closeness to land. A Neanderthal body was not a failed modern body. It was a body shaped by its own world. For a long time, older ideas made Neanderthals seem crude, slow, and almost separate from the human story. That image has changed. Evidence from sites across their range suggests skilled toolmaking, hunting, use of fire, repeated occupation of places, and survival in conditions that would have been severe even for strong groups. There is evidence that they processed animals, used stone tools in patterned ways, and sometimes cared for individuals who had lived with injury or physical difficulty. Scientists continue to debate many details of Neanderthal behavior, symbolism, and cognition, so it is better not to turn every trace into a confident claim about modern-like minds. But the older picture of them as simple brutes no longer holds. Their lives were difficult, but difficulty is not the same as emptiness. A being who endures cold, makes tools, finds food, moves through dangerous landscapes, and remains within a social group is already living inside a complex world of attention. Imagine a cold valley near evening, not as a dramatic scene, but as a slow one. The light thins, wind moves across stone, A group stays near shelter. Tools lie close to hands. Food, if there is any, must be cut, shared, guarded, or carried. A child, an injured adult, or an older member of the group changes what everyone must do. The body must hold warmth through the night. The memory of nearby routes, animal movement, fuel, water, and safe ground matters. Nothing in this scene requires us to invent more than the evidence allows. It simply asks us to remember that fossils once belonged to living days. The mystery of Neanderthals comes partly from how close they stand to us and partly from how much is still silent. We know they were not us. We also know they were not outside the human family. Genetic evidence has shown that many people alive today carry small amounts of Neanderthal ancestry, which means the boundary between them and some of our ancestors was not absolute. That fact does not make them identical to us. It makes the story more intimate and more complicated. There were encounters. There was mixture. There were overlapping histories, yet the lives behind those encounters are almost entirely lost. We do not know what it felt like when different human groups saw each other across a landscape. We do not know whether a meeting meant fear, avoidance, violence, curiosity, exchange, or simply passing through the same region at different times. Neanderthals remain mysterious because they are close enough to touch our ancestry, but far enough away that their world cannot be restored in full. They ask us to imagine a time when the human face had more than one familiar form, and when the word human had not yet narrowed into only us. A Neanderthal body can look, at first, like an answer made of bone to a cold and difficult world. The chest was broad, the limbs were relatively short and powerful, the muscles would have attached to strong bones, the face projected differently from ours, with a large nose and a heavy brow that makes their skulls instantly recognizable. These features are often described through climate, strength, and adaptation, and that is useful as long as we do not make the body too simple. A body is never shaped by one pressure alone. It is the result of ancestry, growth, diet, movement, injury, reproduction, and environment working together over a long time. Still, when we imagine Neanderthals in Ice Age Europe and Western Asia, the body begins to feel like part of the landscape. Cold air, uneven stone, heavy animal hides, long walks, large prey, winter scarcity, and shelter in caves or rock overhangs would not have been background details. They would have entered the bones through daily life. Near the older root of human existence, survival was never separated from the physical body. Thinking mattered, learning mattered, social life mattered, but every decision still had to pass through muscle, hunger, warmth, pain, and fatigue. Neanderthals show this with unusual force. Their tools also tell part of the story. They made and used stone tools in repeated, skilled ways, often associated with what archaeologists call Middle Paleolithic technologies. Many tools were not random broken rocks. They show planning in how stone was selected, prepared, struck, sharpened, and used. A cutting edge may seem small in the hand today, but in a cold prehistoric landscape it could mean access to food, skin, wood, bone, or fiber. It could help separate meat from an animal, scrape a hide, shape a point, or solve a problem that had to be solved before night. Tools do not prove every thought we might wish to imagine, but they do show patterned attention. They show hands trained by repeated practice. They show learning that likely passed through watching and doing, perhaps through sound, gesture, correction, and memory. This matters because the mysterious humans before us were not only bodies moving through nature, they were bodies changing nature in small, practical ways. Fire, too, belongs carefully in this picture. Evidence suggests Neanderthals used fire, though the regularity and circumstances of fire use can vary between sites and periods. We do not need to claim more than that to understand its importance. Fire changes darkness. It changes cold. It changes the way a place feels at night. It can warm a group, help process food, protect space, and gather bodies into a shared area. In a world without houses as we know them, without lamps, without stored heat, a hearth or burning fuel would have been more than a tool. It would have been a center of attention. A cave with fire is not simply a cave. It is a boundary between the outside and the inside, between exposure and temporary shelter. The same deep human beginning that shaped our own need for warmth and safety can be seen in another form, in Neanderthal life. They occupied places repeatedly. They hunted or scavenged large animals depending on time and situation. They handled stone, bone, wood, and animal bodies. They endured injuries that sometimes healed, suggesting survival beyond the first moment of harm. Some individuals lived with physical difficulties, which has led researchers to discuss care within Neanderthal groups, though each case must be read cautiously. The important point is not to make them gentle or brutal by modern desire. It is to see that they lived socially. A lone body in such environments would have faced severe limits. Food acquisition, protection, learning, and survival through childhood all point toward group life. Their world was not a silent line of isolated hunters. It was likely made of repeated contact, dependence, tension, attention, and shared risk. When we place Neanderthals inside their environment, their mystery becomes stronger, not weaker. They were not caricatures crouched at the edge of history. They were a human population shaped by cold landscapes, skilled hands, strong bodies, and social survival. But we still cannot hear the meaning they gave to any of it. We can find the tool. We can find the hearth. We can find the injured bone that healed. We can find the remains of animals they used. Yet the inner world remains dim. That dimness is where the story must stay honest. Neanderthals were close enough to make us recognize a human struggle for warmth, food, shelter, and company, but different enough to remind us that the human family once had more than one way to endure the night. Neanderthals should not be made smaller than they were, but they should not be made larger than the evidence allows. That balance is difficult because they stand so close to us in the human story. If they were more distant, it might be easier to treat them as another vanished branch, important but remote. If they were identical to us, there would be little mystery left. Instead, they occupy the uneasy middle. Their bones show clear differences. Their genetic legacy touches many people alive today. Their tools and sites show repeated skill and adaptation. Their disappearance leaves a silence that is still not explained by one simple cause. This is why they are so often misunderstood. For a long time, people imagined them as rough, heavy, almost failed creatures at the edge of humanity. Later, in reaction, some portrayals made them seem nearly the same as modern humans in every way. Both pictures can comfort us, but neither is careful enough. The older picture lets us feel superior. The newer picture lets us erase the distance. The more honest view is quieter. Neanderthals were a real human population, close relatives, deeply adapted to their world, capable of complex survival, and still not simply another version of us. Near the beginning of our own story, that distinction matters. The human family was not a ladder where one step existed only to be replaced by the next. It was a branching set of lives, each with its own pressures and possibilities. Neanderthals were not waiting for Homo sapiens to arrive and give their existence meaning. They had already lived through long ages of cold and change, across landscapes that shaped their bodies and habits. A Neanderthal group moving through a valley, returning to a shelter, carrying stone, watching animals, tending fire, or enduring a winter was not a symbol of our future. It was a present life to them. They did not know they would become the question we ask now. They only had the immediate work of staying alive. The evidence for their closeness to us is real, but closeness should not be confused with sameness. Ancient DNA has shown that some Homo sapiens groups interbred with Neanderthals, and that small portions of Neanderthal ancestry remain in many modern human populations outside Africa. This makes the boundary between them and us more complicated than a clean replacement story. Yet genes do not give back a face-to-face encounter. They do not tell us how often meetings happened, where they happened, what those meetings felt like, or how people understood one another. A genetic trace is powerful, but it is also strangely cold. It can show connection without memory. It tells us that lives touched, but not how those lives were experienced. That is why Neanderthals feel close enough to unsettle us. They did not vanish completely in a simple sense, because something of them entered later human inheritance. But their own populations, their own continuity, their own way of being human, came to an end. The world that held them closed behind them. When we look at their remains, we are not only looking at difference, we are looking at loss. A form of humanity that had endured for a very long time no longer has living members to speak for it. Its tools remain, its bones remain, its genetic traces remain, but its nights, decisions, sounds, and bonds are gone. This loss should make us careful with easy explanations. Neanderthal disappearance has been discussed through climate change, small population size, competition, interbreeding, disease, ecological pressure, and the arrival or expansion of Homo sapiens. These factors may have interacted in different ways across regions. It is unlikely that one simple sentence can hold the whole answer. Deep history rarely moves like a clean story with a single villain and a single cause. Populations can decline slowly. Groups can merge. Environments can shift faster than bodies or traditions can adjust. A lineage can fade while leaving traces inside another. Neanderthals ask us to accept a more patient kind of history. They were neither monsters in the dark nor modern people wearing older bones. They were humans of another kind, near enough to remind us of ourselves, different enough to show that humanity once had more than one living face. Their presence makes the title question feel deeper, because the mysterious humans before us were not all far away in time. Some stood close to our ancestors, close enough for contact, close enough for inheritance, and close enough that their absence still feels like a missing room in the house of human memory. Denisovans are different from Neanderthals in the way they enter the story. Neanderthals can be imagined through many fossils, many sites, and a long history of discoveries that slowly built a face in the public mind. Denisovans arrived more like a shadow made visible by science. For a long time there was no familiar skull, no widely recognized body, no complete image that people could point to and say, this is what they looked like. Their presence was first recognized in a powerful way through ancient DNA from a small bone fragment found in Denisova cave in Siberia, along with later evidence from other remains and genetic studies. That is what makes them so strange and so important. They are among the mysterious humans who lived before us, but they seem almost to have stepped out of the genetic record before they stepped fully into the fossil record. A tiny piece of bone, small enough that it might not look important to an ordinary eye, carried enough biological information to reveal a human group distinct from both modern humans and Neanderthals. Though related to them, this is a quiet revolution in how we understand the human past. It means that some ancient humans may not be known first by the shape of a skull or the strength of a limb, but by traces inside cells, by fragments of inheritance preserved for tens of thousands of years under rare conditions. Near the beginning of our own story, that changes the feeling of evidence itself. The ground does not only hold bones. Sometimes, when preservation is kind and technology is careful, it holds relationships. It holds a family map written in molecules. Denisovans remind us that the human world was even more layered than bones alone once suggested. They were not a myth added to fill an empty place. They were a real population, or perhaps a set of related populations, known through genetic signals and limited fossil evidence. Yet their physical appearance, range, and daily life remain much less clear than those of Neanderthals. We have to speak carefully here, because science is still filling in the picture. Some Denisovan-related ancestry appears in certain modern human populations, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania, showing that encounters and interbreeding occurred between Denisovan-related groups and ancestors of some living people. There is also evidence that Denisovan-related ancestry contributed to adaptation in high-altitude populations in Tibet, through genetic variants associated with living in thin air. But such facts should not tempt us to imagine a full civilization where the evidence only gives us a few outlines. The honest mystery is stronger than invention. Imagine a cave in a cold landscape, used by different human groups across long periods. Sediments gather slowly. Bones break. Teeth are lost. Ash, stone tools, animal remains, and tiny fragments mix with the passing of time. In that kind of place, a small bone can become a doorway into a vanished population, yet the doorway opens only a little. We may learn that Denisovans existed, that they were related to Neanderthals, that they interacted in some way with Homo sapiens, and that their ancestry did not entirely disappear, but we cannot easily see their faces by the fire. We cannot know the sound of their voices, the size of their groups, the full range of lands they crossed, or the way they understood mountains, forests, cold, animals, or strangers. Their story shows how much of early humanity may have existed outside the reach of traditional evidence. If one small fragment could reveal an entire ancient human group, then how many other groups might have lived without leaving the right kind of trace? How many populations moved through warm, wet regions where DNA decays quickly? How many bones dissolved before they could become fossils? How many human histories remain hidden because the Earth did not preserve them in a way we can read? Denisovans make the human past feel less like a fixed museum display and more like a dark room where one lamp has just been lit. The lamp does not show everything. It only reveals that the room is larger than expected. For a sleep audio story about the mysterious humans before us, Denisovans are important because they carry mystery without needing exaggeration. They are real, yet hard to see. They are close enough to have left traces in living people, yet distant enough that their own world remains mostly unknown. They turn the question of who lived before us into something deeper than bones alone. A question about hidden populations, vanished bodies, and the quiet genetic threads that still pass through human life today. The strange thing about Denisovans is that they can feel both almost invisible and strangely present. For many ancient humans, the first image comes from bone, a skull shape, a jaw, a brow, a limb, a body that can be drawn, measured, and compared. With Denisovans, the feeling is different. Their world remains difficult to picture, yet their traces can still be found in the inheritance of some people living now. This makes them one of the clearest examples of how a human group can disappear as a visible population while not vanishing completely from the deeper biological story. A people can leave no monuments, no written words, no remembered name, and only a handful of physical remains, yet still pass something forward through ancient encounters. That thought is quiet, but it changes the meaning of disappearance. It suggests that the past does not always end by being erased. Sometimes it thins out. Sometimes it mixes. Sometimes one population fades as a separate presence, while small parts of it continue inside later generations. Near the beginning of our own story, this is important because the human family was not made of sealed boxes. Populations moved, they met, they separated. They sometimes exchanged genes. The boundaries between different human groups could be real and important, but not always absolute. Denisovans help us see this more clearly because their strongest evidence comes not from a complete body, but from relationship itself. Ancient DNA revealed that they were related to Neanderthals, but not the same as Neanderthals. It also revealed that some ancestors of modern humans interbred with Denisovan-related groups. That means the mysterious humans before us were not always simply replaced from a distance. In some times and places, the story was closer, more intimate, and more complicated. Yet genetics can create a false sense of certainty if we are not careful. A percentage of ancestry does not give us a village, a face, a language, or a memory. It cannot tell us whether an encounter was peaceful, tense, brief, repeated, local, or widespread. It cannot show the ordinary life surrounding the moment when two human lineages met. It only tells us that, somewhere in the long human past, contact happened deeply enough to leave biological traces. Those traces later travelled through generations, carried by people who may not have known anything about their origin. This is one of the most haunting parts of the Denisovan story. Something from a vanished human group can remain without being remembered. A person alive today may carry a small thread from an ancient population whose own name was never spoken in any language we know. The body remembers what culture has forgotten, but we should not turn that sentence into poetry without science beneath it. The memory here is not conscious memory. It is inheritance, chemistry, ancestry, and population history. It is not a hidden message. It is not a secret wisdom. It is simply the quiet fact that reproduction can preserve traces long after stories disappear. In some modern populations, Denisovan-related ancestry is more visible genetically than in others, especially in parts of Oceania and Asia. One famous example often discussed is a gene variant associated with high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations, which appears to have come from Denisovan-related ancestry. This does not mean Denisovans were magically built for every extreme landscape, and it does not mean we understand their whole life on mountains or plateaus. It means that one genetic contribution passed through ancient mixture appears to have mattered in a specific environmental setting for later humans. that is enough. The truth is already powerful without exaggeration. It shows that ancient meetings could shape survival far beyond the people who first met. It shows that the vanished are not always completely gone. Still, most of Denisovan life remains hidden. We do not know the full extent of their range. We do not know how many different Denisovan-related populations existed. We do not know exactly how varied their bodies were across Asia. We cannot reconstruct their daily world with the same confidence we can sometimes attempt with better-known groups. A few remains and genetic signals point toward a large absence. That absence may be the real center of the story. Denisovans remind us that the history of humans before us may contain entire populations that were once alive, adaptive, social, and enduring, but now appear only as faint lines in DNA and rare fragments of bone. Their disappearance was not a clean closing of a door. It was more like a fire burning low until the flame itself was gone, while a little warmth passed into other hands. When we ask who the mysterious humans before us were, Denisovans answer in the most unsettling way. Some of them may be known less by the bodies they left behind than by the traces they left inside us. Denisovans leave us with a rare kind of uncertainty. We know they existed, but we cannot yet place them in the mind as easily as Neanderthals. We cannot look at a well-known skull and slowly imagine the face. We cannot describe their bodies with the same confidence, across a broad range, because the fossil evidence remains limited. We cannot walk through their camps in imagination without feeling how quickly we might begin to invent more than the ground has given. This is why their story has to be told with restraint. The restraint does not make them less mysterious. It makes them more mysterious in the right way. They are not a blank space that we should fill with fantasy. They are a real human presence, whose outline is still faint. The known evidence gives us a few strong points. Ancient DNA showed a population related to Neanderthals but distinct from them. Some modern humans carry Denisovan-related ancestry, and a small number of fossil remains and genetic signals suggest that this group, or groups related to it, once had a wider role in Asia than the early fragments alone could show. But between those points lies an enormous silence. What did their faces look like across different regions? How did their bodies vary? What tools did they make in different places? How did they move through cold caves, high plateaus, forests, rivers, and open land? How many Denisovan-related populations were there, and how different were they from one another? These are not simple missing details. They are the difference between knowing that a people existed and knowing the texture of their world. Near the beginning of our own story, this matters because Denisovans reveal how much human history can exist beneath the edge of visibility. If science had relied only on complete skeletons, the Denisovan story might have remained hidden much longer. Their discovery showed that tiny fragments can hold enormous meaning when the right methods are used, but it also showed the limits of those methods. Ancient DNA survives best under certain conditions, often cooler and more stable environments. In warm, wet, acidic, or disturbed settings, genetic material may decay too quickly. That means many regions where ancient humans may have lived are harder to read through DNA. The absence of genetic evidence in a place does not necessarily mean absence of people. It may mean absence of preservation. This makes the map of the human past uneven, shaped by climate, chemistry, geology, and luck. Denisovans stand at the center of that unevenness. They ask us to imagine human populations that may once have lived widely, but now appear only where preservation allowed a signal to remain. Their mystery also changes how we think about identity. It is easy, from the present, to divide the past into named groups: Neanderthal, Denisovan, Homo sapiens, Homo erectus. Names help us think, but names can also make ancient populations seem more separate and more fixed than they may have been. In reality, groups changed through time. They spread, shrank, mixed, and adapted. A label may cover many generations and wide spaces. With Denisovans especially, the name points to evidence first recognized from one place, but the ancestry related to them appears across a much larger story. This does not give us permission to speak carelessly. It gives us a reason to speak slowly. The human family was not made of clean boxes arranged in a museum case. It was more like weather moving through mountains, dividing, joining, thinning, returning, leaving traces in places far from where it began. Denisovans are one of the strongest reminders of that. They are close enough to have touched the ancestry of living people, yet distant enough that we still do not clearly know their faces. They may have lived in worlds of cold stone, high air, forest edges, river valleys, and long movement, but each setting must be tied to evidence before it can be spoken as fact. The safest image is not a complete portrait. It is a dim human outline made of bone fragments, DNA, and unanswered questions. That outline is enough to deepen the entire video's central question. The mysterious humans before us were not only the ones whose skulls we can display and compare, some were almost invisible until their genetic traces revealed them. Some may still be invisible, some may never be known because the Earth did not keep their remains in a readable form. Denisovans teach us that the human past is larger than our evidence, and that our evidence is still growing. They leave us not with a final picture, but with a humbler way to look backward, knowing that before we were alone, the world may have held human lives, whose bones are scarce, whose names are gone, and whose presence survives only in the faintest marks of inheritance. On a small island, the human story takes on a different shape. Far from the great open routes of continental migration, far from the wide, cold valleys of Neanderthals or the shadowy genetic traces of Denisovans, there was once another kind of human life on Flores, an island in Indonesia. The name most often given to this ancient human is Homo floresiensis. Its remains, discovered in Liangbua cave, startled researchers because they pointed to a very small-bodied human relative living surprisingly late in prehistory. The small size was not the only strange thing. The combination of features made the find difficult to place neatly inside the old idea that human evolution always moved toward larger bodies, larger brains, and more familiar forms. Here, on an island, the story seemed to bend. A human relative with a small body and a small brain had lived in a real landscape, used stone tools, and survived in a world that was not simple or easy. This is why Homo floresiensis matters for the question of the mysterious humans before us. It shows that ancient humanity was not only wide in time, but wide in form. The beginning of our own story was not a single upward climb. It included side paths shaped by isolation, local ecology, and the deep pressure of place. Islands can do unusual things to bodies. Over many generations, large animals may become smaller when food and space are limited. Small animals may sometimes become larger when predators are absent or conditions favour it. This does not happen like a quick transformation in one lifetime. It happens slowly through survival and reproduction across long stretches of time. When scientists discuss Homo floresiensis, one major question is whether its small body reflects island evolution from an earlier human ancestor, possibly related in some way to Homo erectus or another earlier lineage, or whether its origins were even more complex. The exact path is still debated. That debate should remain open, but the island setting gives the mystery a strong and honest frame. Flores was not an empty stage. It had forests, volcanic landscapes, caves, changing coastlines, unusual animals, and limits that any living population had to face. A small human body there was not automatically a weakness. It may have been part of a different balance between energy, food, movement, and survival. Near the deeper root of human existence, this is an important correction. We often judge the past by the body we know best, our own. We imagine bigger brains, taller bodies, longer reach, and wider travel as the main direction of becoming human. Homo floresiensis quietly unsettles that habit. It asks whether one way of being human-like could become smaller, more local, and still endure. A small body walking through an island forest is not a lesser story just because it does not look like the path that led to us. It is another answer to the same ancient problem. How does a living group stay alive in the place where it finds itself? The evidence from Flores does not allow us to rebuild every detail of their lives. We should not imagine too much too quickly. We do not know their language. If they had one in any form, we would recognize. We do not know the full depth of their social life. We do not know exactly how they understood the animals, caves, fires, storms, or shorelines around them. But the remains and associated archaeology are enough to show that they were not fantasy. They were part of the real human past, small in body but large in what they do to our assumptions. Their presence makes the human family feel less like a straight road and more like a coastline seen from far away, full of hidden inlets, separate bays, and paths that end where the sea begins. Homo floresiensis reminds us that the mysterious humans before us were not always grand, powerful, or close to our own image. Some were small, some were isolated. Some survived in places where evolution followed a different rhythm. And on Flores, that rhythm left behind bones that still ask us to reconsider what kinds of humans once shared the earth. An island does not need to be large to reshape a lineage. It only needs time, distance, and limits. On a continent, animals and human groups can move across broad regions when climate shifts, rivers dry, forests retreat, or food becomes scarce. There may be another valley, another plain, another coastline beyond the horizon. An island changes that relationship with space. The sea becomes a boundary. Food webs become more local. Populations may be smaller. The range of animals may be unusual. A group that reaches such a place has to live inside a narrower world, not necessarily poorer in every sense, but different in the way it presses on the body. This is the setting that makes Homo floresiensis so important. The small body found in the evidence from Flores was not simply a curiosity. It was a sign that the human family could be shaped by isolation in ways that challenge our ordinary expectations. Near the deeper beginning of humanity, the body was always an answer to place. On Flores, that answer seems to have been written through scale, energy, movement, and survival inside an island ecology. We should not speak as though every question is settled. Scientists still debate the ancestry of Homo floresiensis, how it arrived on Flores, and exactly how its unusual anatomy should be understood. But the broad lesson remains strong. Evolution does not always move toward the body that later humans consider normal. In some environments, smaller size may reduce energy needs. A smaller body may require less food, which can matter in a place where resources are limited or seasonal. On islands, large mammals have sometimes evolved smaller forms over time, a pattern known from several animal lineages. Whether Homo floresiensis followed a version of this path from an earlier human ancestor is still debated, but the possibility helps explain why an island can feel like a separate experiment in survival. This is not a magical transformation. It is the slow filtering of generations. Individuals live, reproduce, or fail to reproduce under local pressures. Over long spans, bodies can change in ways no single lifetime could choose. The island does not plan the body. It simply rewards some traits and not others, quietly, repeatedly, until the population is different from its distant relatives. The environment of Flores would not have been empty or gentle. There were volcanic landscapes, forests, caves, and animals unlike those on many continents. Stone tools found in association with the broader archaeological context show that small-bodied humans there interacted with their surroundings through technology, not merely through instinct. Tools suggest hands solving practical problems. They suggest cutting, processing, and repeated knowledge of materials. We must be careful not to assign modern thought too easily, but we also should not underestimate the significance of practical skill. A small brain, by modern standards, does not mean a life without complexity. The relationship between brain size and behavior is not simple enough to reduce a human lineage to one number. What matters is how a body, a group, and a landscape work together. Homo floresiensis seems to ask us to separate human value from familiar proportions. Tallness is not a measure of importance. Brain size alone is not a full biography. A small hand holding a sharp stone on an island forest floor still belongs to the story of human adaptation. It still speaks of hunger, danger, memory, and the pressure to solve immediate problems. The mystery deepens because Flores also reminds us how fragile and local some human histories may have been. A population can endure for a long time in one place and still leave only limited traces. A cave may preserve bones, nearby forests may preserve almost nothing, the shoreline may shift. Volcanic activity may bury or disturb layers. Later animals and humans may change the ground. We are left with pieces, and the pieces point toward a world that was once full enough for life but too distant for certainty. If Homo erectus showed a long human shadow across continents, Homo floresiensis shows something almost opposite, a narrower, island-shaped possibility, a human relative living along a path that did not lead toward us in a straight line. The small humans of Flores make the title question more vivid because they show that the mysterious humans before us were not mysterious only because we lack evidence. They were mysterious because evolution itself made more than one kind of human answer to the world. Some answers walked far, some endured cold, some hid in genetic traces, some lived small on islands, where the sea held the edges of their world. Homo floresiensis matters because it interrupts one of the most comfortable stories people tell about evolution. We often imagine the past as a ladder, with each form rising towards something larger, smarter, and more like ourselves. In that picture, a smaller human with a smaller brain feels like a step backward, a puzzle that needs to be explained away. But evolution does not work to satisfy human pride. It does not move toward a throne. It moves through conditions. It changes bodies through survival, reproduction, isolation, chance, and time. On Flores, the human story seems to have followed a path that did not point toward tall modern bodies or large modern brains. It followed the shape of an island. That does not make Homo floresiensis less important. It makes this ancient human more important for understanding how wide the human family once was. Near the root of our own existence, becoming human was never one clean direction. It was a set of experiments made by landscapes, climates, foods, dangers, and inherited bodies. Some branches travelled widely, some grew strong in cold regions, some left traces in DNA, some became small in a bounded world of forest, cave, volcanic ground, and sea. The small humans of Flores ask us to remove the word progress from places where it does not belong. Their lives were not a failed attempt to become us. They were a different answer to a different world. A small body can be an adaptation, not an error. A limited range can still hold a complete life. A cave site can preserve enough to show presence without letting us pretend we know everything. When we imagine Homo floresiensis, the safest image is not a crowd of strange little people acting out a fantasy. It is a quiet island landscape where a real human relative lived inside real ecological limits. There were tools, there were animals, there were shelters or places repeatedly used. There was food to find and danger to avoid. There were bodies that had to sleep, heal, move, and remain warm enough through the night. There were generations that began, struggled, and ended without leaving names. Their smallness does not make their hunger smaller. It does not make injury less serious. It does not make night less dark. It simply means that the body meeting those problems had a form different from ours. This is the deeper lesson of Homo floresiensis. The category of human, when seen through deep time, becomes less dependent on looking familiar. It becomes a question of ancestry, adaptation, behavior, and evidence. We do not need them to resemble us closely in order to take them seriously. Their difference is the point. Their existence shows that the mysterious humans before us were not arranged in a neat sequence from primitive to advanced. They were distributed across environments, each carrying its own pressures. On an island, evolution may turn inward. A population can become intensely local. Its world can be bounded by water, yet still full of complexity. The horizon may be smaller, but the demand of living remains complete. And because islands preserve histories unevenly, much of that life may always be beyond us. We can ask how they arrived. We can ask how long they endured. We can ask how their tools were made, how they found food, how they interacted with the animals around them, and what finally happened to them. Some answers are supported by evidence. Others remain debated. The honest story must hold both. It must let the known remain clear and the unknown remain open. Homo floresiensis makes the wider human past feel less like a road and more like a branching forest where some paths are narrow, hidden, and difficult to follow. One branch reached our own species. Another may have crossed continents. Another left genetic traces. Another lived small on Flores and disappeared. When we ask who the mysterious humans before us were, this island human answers softly. They were not all versions of us waiting to be completed. Some were complete in their own environments, even if their line ended. Some remind us that survival is not the same as becoming modern. Some show that the human family once held forms that now seem almost impossible only because we are the last familiar shape still here. Homo naledi enters the story from darkness. Not the darkness of myth, but the real darkness of a cave system in South Africa, where bones were found deep inside passages that are difficult to reach. From the beginning, this made the discovery feel different. The fossils were not lying in an open landscape where wind and river could easily explain their gathering. They were found in a place that made researchers ask careful questions about how so many remains came to be there. Yet before any larger meaning is suggested, the first truth is simpler and stronger. Homo naledi was a real ancient human relative, known from many bones, with a body that does not fit easily into our expectations. Its remains show a striking mixture of traits. Some parts look more primitive or older in evolutionary character. Other parts seem more human-like. The hands, feet, shoulders, skull, teeth, and body proportions invite comparison, but they resist a simple label. This is why Homo naledi matters in a video about the mysterious humans before us. It reminds us that deep human history was not tidy. The past did not arrange bodies in a neat order from ape-like to human-like, each one cleaner and more modern than the last. Instead, different features could exist together in unexpected combinations. A small brain could belong to a body with feet suited for walking. Hands could show both climbing-related traits and signs of manipulation. A creature could be close enough to our wider human family to feel important, while still strange enough to unsettle the categories we like to use. Near the beginning of our own story, this is a necessary lesson. Evolution does not build bodies like a straight staircase. It keeps old structures, changes some, leaves others, and produces combinations that make sense only when seen through time, environment, and inheritance. Homo naledi is especially powerful because its discovery asks us to slow down before drawing conclusions. A cave is never just a backdrop. It shapes preservation. It shapes access. It shapes what can be found and what cannot. Deep spaces inside caves can protect bones from weather, but they also complicate interpretation. How did the bones get there? Were bodies placed there by members of the same species? Were there natural processes involved that are not immediately obvious? What did the cave mean, if it meant anything at all, to the beings whose remains were found there? These questions have been discussed strongly, and some interpretations remain debated. For a truthful story, the safest path is not to force a dramatic answer. The safer and more valuable path is to let the cave hold its uncertainty. Homo naledi shows us that evidence can be rich and still difficult to explain. Many bones can give us a body, but not always a behavior. Many individuals can suggest a repeated pattern, but not always the intention behind it. The darkness of the cave can feel symbolic to us, but our feeling is not proof of what they thought. Still, the place matters. It gives the story a quiet power because it places an ancient human relative in an environment where the ordinary rules of survival seem interrupted. We are used to imagining early humans near fires, water, animals, stone tools, or open land. Here, we are asked to think about a body in deep stone passages, far from daylight. That image should not be made supernatural. It should remain physical, narrow spaces, rock walls, darkness, difficult movement, bones preserved in hidden chambers, and scientists trying to read an event from fragments left behind. Homo naledi does not need exaggeration to be mysterious. Its mystery comes from being real, abundant in remains, and still unresolved in meaning. The bones tell us that another human form existed. The anatomy tells us that human evolution was more varied than a simple line. The cave tells us that evidence can raise questions that remain open even after major discoveries. When we ask who the mysterious humans before us were, Homo naledi answers by refusing to become simple. It stands in the dark part of the family tree, not because it is imaginary, but because it shows how much of the human beginning still waits beyond the reach of easy explanation. The cave around Homo naledi should be imagined slowly, without turning it into a scene of fear. Stone walls, narrow spaces, hidden chambers, and the absence of daylight already carry enough weight. The important thing is not to make the darkness dramatic, but to understand why it makes the evidence difficult. Bones found deep in a cave system can raise questions that bones found in an open landscape might not raise in the same way. If remains are scattered on a riverbank, water, animals, erosion, or later disturbance may be considered. If remains are found in a protected inner chamber, the possibilities feel different, but they do not automatically become simple. This is where Homo naledi becomes one of the most careful parts of the human story. The discovery gives us many remains, enough to see a body with unusual combinations of traits, but the setting invites questions that are still debated. Some researchers have argued that the location of the remains may suggest deliberate placement of bodies, while others have urged caution and asked whether natural processes, difficult to see geological roots, or other explanations could account for the pattern. A truthful telling must not settle the debate more strongly than the evidence allows. Near the beginning of our own story, this kind of caution matters because burial, ritual, and symbolic behavior are heavy words. They carry meanings from our own human experience. If we use them too quickly, we may place modern assumptions onto an ancient species whose mind we cannot enter. Yet if we avoid the question completely, we also lose what makes the site important. The honest path is to stand at the edge of the evidence and let the uncertainty remain visible. Homo naledi may show us behavior that is more complex than expected for a small-brained human relative, or it may show us that caves preserve remains in ways we do not yet fully understand. Either possibility is important. Neither needs exaggeration. The bones themselves already force us to rethink a simple ladder of human evolution. The skull suggests a small brain compared with modern humans, but the feet and legs point toward walking on the ground. The hands show features that invite discussion about manipulation, while also retaining traits that may relate to climbing. The teeth and body form do not fall neatly into one familiar category. This mosaic matters because it reminds us that evolution can combine features in ways that seem strange only because we expect the past to move in one direction. A species does not become modern all at once. A body can carry old and newer traits together, each shaped by ancestry and environment. The cave adds another layer. Inside a deep chamber, a body is no longer just anatomy. It becomes part of a place. Was the place accessible to Homo naledi? If so, how often and under what conditions? Did they enter with light? Did they move through darkness by memory or touch? Were the remains placed, dropped, washed, or accumulated in another way? These questions do not have to be answered immediately to be meaningful. They reveal how much depends on context. A bone outside its setting is a clue. A bone inside a difficult place becomes part of a larger puzzle about movement, behavior, death, and preservation. For sleep audio, the image can remain quiet. Not a horror cave, not a sacred chamber confidently named, but a deep space where ancient human bones waited through immense time. The silence there is not empty. It is full of questions that cannot yet speak clearly. Homo naledi asks us to separate wonder from certainty. Wonder is allowed. The evidence is remarkable. Certainty must be earned more slowly. This distinction is one of the educational values of the whole story. The mysterious humans before us do not become more interesting when we pretend to know everything. They become more interesting when we understand exactly where knowledge ends and mystery begins. In the dark chambers associated with Homo naledi, the human past feels close and distant at once. Close, because the bones belong to a member of our wider family, a being that walked upright, moved through a real landscape, and lived under the pressure of hunger, danger, sleep, and social existence. Distant, because the meaning of those bones in that cave remains partly beyond reach. The cave does not give us an answer. It gives us a boundary. On one side is evidence, anatomy, location, sediment, comparison, careful excavation. On the other side is the lost life, intention, memory, fear, habit, and whatever sense of the dead Homo naledi may or may not have had. Between those sides, the mystery remains. Homo naledi leaves us with one of the most useful kinds of mystery, a mystery that does not ask us to believe something unsupported, but asks us to remain patient when the evidence is not yet enough to close the question. It would be easy to turn the cave into a simple story. It would be easy to say that these ancient humans must have carried their dead into darkness with intention, or to reject that idea completely because their brains were small compared with ours. But both reactions move too quickly. The bones ask for a slower mind. They show a real population with a surprising body, found in a setting that is difficult to explain in ordinary ways, and surrounded by debate about what the pattern means. That is already enough. We do not need to force a final answer onto the evidence to feel its weight. Near the deep beginning of humanity, Homo naledi makes one truth very clear. The past is not obligated to fit our expectations about what a human relative should be able to do. A small brain does not automatically mean a simple life. A human-like foot does not automatically mean a modern mind. A hand capable of manipulation does not tell us exactly what was imagined or understood. Anatomy opens questions, but it does not always close them. That is why Homo naledi stands so strangely in the human family. It brings together traits that seem to belong to different chapters, and then places those traits inside a dark cave context that makes the whole story more difficult to hold. When we ask how they lived, we have to begin with what their bodies suggest. They walked upright. They were not shaped like modern humans, but they were part of our broader human lineage. They had hands, feet, teeth, shoulders, and skulls that each tell a different part of the story. They likely moved through a landscape outside the cave, finding food, avoiding danger, resting, reproducing, and surviving in groups as living populations must. They were not cave bones first. They were living bodies first. The cave came later, at least for the remains we have. This distinction matters because fossils can trap our imagination in the place where they are found. A skeleton in a cave makes us imagine cave life. But the life of Homo naledi would have included daylight, terrain, food sources, weather, and repeated movement through the surrounding environment. The cave is the preserved ending of some remains, not the whole beginning of their existence. Still, the cave cannot be ignored. Its darkness has become part of how we understand them, because it asks whether these beings engaged with space in ways that were more complex than older assumptions would allow. The answer remains debated, and that debate should be respected. Some claims about markings, fire use, and deliberate body disposal associated with Homo naledi have been discussed in recent research and public conversation, but they remain subjects that require careful evaluation. A sleep audio story should not exaggerate them into certainty. The calmer truth is stronger. Homo naledi reminds us that early human relatives may have had behaviors we do not yet understand, and that our own categories may be too narrow. The mysterious humans before us were not simply waiting in a line for modern intelligence to appear. They were living under their own conditions, solving their own problems, and leaving behind evidence that sometimes points beyond easy explanation. That does not mean we should project modern beliefs onto them. It means we should keep the question open. There is a kind of respect in not inventing a mind for the dead. There is also respect in not denying possibility just because the body looks unfamiliar. Homo naledi sits between those two forms of respect. It teaches us that scientific humility is not emptiness. It is attention. It is the willingness to say, this bone is real, this place is real, this question is real, but the answer is not yet secure. In the wider story of mysterious humans, that humility is essential. Neanderthals challenge us with closeness. Denisovans challenge us with genetic invisibility. Homo floresiensis challenges us with island difference. Homo naledi challenges us with uncertainty inside the evidence itself. Its bones do not give us a complete life, but they do give us a warning against simple histories. The beginning of humanity was not a clean staircase of bodies becoming steadily more like us. It was a tangled field of experiments, survivals, and endings, some of them preserved in places so hidden that even their discovery feels like entering a question. Homo naledi remains there, not as a solved riddle, but as a quiet human presence in the dark, asking us how much of the human past we are still unable to understand. A skull is never only a skull when it belongs to an ancient human. It is also a record of chewing, breathing, growth, inheritance, and the long pressure of a world that no longer exists. A jaw is not only a jaw. It once helped a living body meet food, hunger, grit, and wear. A hand bone is not only a hard shape in a drawer. It once belonged to touch, grip, balance, tool use, climbing, carrying, and perhaps gestures we cannot recover. When we look at the mysterious humans before us through their bodies, we are reading a language older than speech. It is a language written by bone, tooth, muscle attachment, joint surface, fracture, healing, and proportion. But it is not an easy language. Every ancient body is both evidence and absence. It tells us what could survive, not everything that mattered. Near the beginning of our own story, this is one of the first lessons the body gives. Being human was not a single shape. Different human relatives carried different answers in their bones. Homo erectus suggests long movement across land. Neanderthals suggest strong bodies adapted to demanding environments, often cold and physically harsh. Denisovans, though still difficult to picture, remind us that some human forms are known more through inheritance than through a complete skeleton. Homo floresiensis shows that a human relative could be small and still belong fully to the story of adaptation. Homo naledi shows that features we expect to appear separately can appear together in one surprising body. These bodies do not line up neatly like steps. They spread out like variations on the same deep problem. How does a primate body become a human-like body under pressure from place, food, danger, distance, and time? The skull often draws the most attention because it seems closest to identity. A face is where we search for recognition. We look for eyes, brow, nose, mouth, forehead, and expression, even when expression is gone. But a fossil skull should be approached carefully. A large brow does not tell us a simple story about intelligence. A small brain does not erase a complex life. A broad face, a projecting jaw, a large nose, or a low forehead can reveal ancestry and adaptation, but not a complete mind. The temptation is to judge ancient humans by how closely their skulls resemble ours. That temptation is understandable, but it narrows the past. The human family was not a contest to look modern. Each skull belonged to a being that had to breathe air, chew food, survive injury, grow from infancy, and live within a group. The face that now seems strange to us may have been ordinary to those who knew it. Teeth, in many ways, are even more patient witnesses than skulls. Teeth can preserve wear from diet, traces of growth, stress, and sometimes chemical clues about what a person ate or where they may have lived. A worn tooth can make an ancient life feel close because it tells of repetition. Food was not an idea. It was a daily struggle between body and material. Tough plants, meat, grit, marrow, roots, seeds, or whatever the environment allowed. In deep human origins, hunger shaped anatomy as surely as walking did. A powerful jaw or worn molar is not dramatic, but it carries the slow pressure of survival. The hands and feet speak in another way. Feet tell of ground. They tell whether a body was adapted for upright walking, long travel, balance, or perhaps some continued relationship with climbing. Hands tell of contact with the world. A thumb, finger, wrist, and palm can suggest gripping, holding, striking, shaping, or carrying. These bones bring ancient humans close to us because we still understand the world through hands. We hold tools, food, children, firewood, stone, memory objects, and one another. Yet a hand bone also reminds us how much has vanished. It cannot tell us whether a gesture comforted someone, warned someone, taught someone, or only solved a physical task. The body speaks, but softly. It gives structure, not biography. That is why the bodies of earlier humans should be read with respect rather than haste. They do not prove that one form was higher and another lower. They show that humanity was once a family of different anatomical answers. Some answers endured for a long time, some vanished. Some left descendants or genetic traces, some left only bones in stone. When we ask who the mysterious humans before us were, their bodies answer first, not with names but with shapes that carry the old demands of Earth, food, movement, and survival. Every ancient body was shaped by a place. This seems simple, but it changes the way we look at the mysterious humans before us. A skull, a hand, a foot, a pelvis, or a tooth did not grow in empty space. It grew inside heat or cold, hunger or relative abundance, forest shade or open ground, rocky hills, island limits, cave shelters, river valleys, dry seasons, and long paths between food and safety. The body is where environment becomes personal. Climate does not remain outside the skin. It enters through breathing, movement, calories, injury, childbirth, sleep, and the need to keep warm. Food does not remain outside the body either. It becomes jaw strength, tooth wear, growth, energy, and survival. Ground becomes foot shape, leg strength, balance, and endurance. This is why earlier humans cannot be understood only by comparing them to us. They must be placed back into the worlds that made them possible. Near the beginning of our own story, the human body was not a fixed design. It was a living negotiation with place. Neanderthal bodies, for example, are often discussed through cold adaptation and physical strength. Their broad frames and robust bones make more sense when seen against Ice Age environments where keeping heat, moving through rough landscapes, and confronting large animals may have mattered constantly. But even here, the environment should not be reduced to one word. Cold was not the only pressure. Food availability, seasonal change, terrain, group size, injury, and inherited traits all work together. A body is never shaped by one problem alone. Homo erectus gives a different lesson. Its more human-like body plan, often associated with long-distance movement on the ground, belongs to a world where range mattered. Open landscapes, shifting resources, and migration routes made the body into a travelling instrument. Long legs, free hands, and endurance were not abstract evolutionary achievements. They were practical ways of living through distance. Homo floresiensis gives another answer. On an island, where space and resources can be limited, a small body may reflect a very different relationship between survival and energy. The small human of Flores does not fit the simple idea that human evolution must always move toward larger size. It shows how isolation can shape bodies in ways that feel strange, only because our own form has become the standard in our imagination. Homo naledi gives still another lesson. Its mixture of traits reminds us that a body can carry older and newer features together, shaped by ancestry and local conditions in ways that do not match a clean sequence. Denisovans, although still hard to see physically, remind us that environments may leave their mark even through genetic inheritance. As some Denisovan-related ancestry appears connected to later high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations, none of these examples should be stretched too far. Each has limits. But together they show that the human family once held many biological answers to many kinds of Earth. This is important because the word human can become too narrow when we only use ourselves as the measure. We live in houses, cities, clothing, artificial light, stored food, and medicine. Our bodies still come from older pressures, but our daily surroundings soften many of them. Earlier humans did not have that separation. Their bodies met the world more directly. A cold night was not a discomfort to be solved by a switch. It was a physical danger. A lost path to water could matter to the whole group. A broken bone could change the future of a life. A poor season could reduce births, weaken bodies, and reshape a population over time. When we look at ancient bones, we are seeing the remains of beings who lived much closer to the raw beginning of human dependence on land. Their bodies are not only anatomical facts, they are records of exposure. They show us that before history had names, human life was already being written by weather, food, distance, shelter, and chance. That is why the mysterious humans before us should not be ranked like earlier and later versions of the same machine. Each body was a meeting point between inheritance and environment. Each belonged to a population trying to remain alive under conditions it did not choose. Some forms endured for a long time. Some disappeared. Some entered later ancestry. Some are known only from a few bones. But all of them remind us that being human once had many shapes because the world itself offered many different tests. To look at the bodies of earlier humans only as evidence of superiority or inferiority is to miss what they are really telling us. A heavy brow is not a moral statement. A small body is not a failure. A large brain is not a complete explanation. A strong hand does not reveal every thought that passed through a life. The bodies of the mysterious humans before us should not be arranged as if they were competing for a single prize called modernity. They were not trying to become us. They were living in the worlds that held them, with the bodies they inherited, under pressures they did not choose. Some bodies were broad and strong. Some were small and island-shaped. Some walked long distances. Some carried combinations of traits that still feel difficult to place. Each one was a different human answer to the same old problem. how to keep a living group alive in a changing world. Near the beginning of our own story, this difference matters because it removes the illusion that there was only one correct human form. We are used to our own bodies because they are the only human bodies still alive. That familiarity can become a hidden bias. We look at a fossil and measure its distance from us, then mistake that distance for rank, but deep history asks for another kind of attention. A Neanderthal chest, a Homo erectus leg, a Homo floresiensis body, a Homo naledi hand, a Denisovan genetic trace. None of these is simply a step below us. Each belongs to a population that met its environment in a particular way. Their value is not that they predicted us. Their value is that they reveal the width of what human life once included. If we slow down, the ancient body becomes less like a museum object and more like a record of exposure. It tells of cold without naming winter, of hunger without naming food, of movement without drawing a map, of injury without telling the pain, of survival without leaving a song. A healed fracture may suggest that an individual lived beyond a moment of danger. A worn tooth may suggest years of chewing the foods available in one place. A strong limb may suggest repeated movement, load, or physical stress. A small body may suggest an energy balance shaped by an island. A skull shape may preserve ancestry and development. But none of these features should be forced into a simple hierarchy. The ancient body does not say, this one was better, this one was worse. It says, this is how life met conditions here, for a while. That phrase, for a while, is important. Every human form before us existed inside time. Some lasted longer than our civilizations can easily imagine. Some may have been brief, local, and fragile. Some disappeared without leaving descendants, some mixed into later populations. Some are still known from so little evidence that even their outlines may change with future discoveries. When a form disappears, it is tempting to think it must have been less successful. But extinction can happen for many reasons. Climate, population size, isolation, competition, interbreeding, disease, changing resources, chance. A lineage can end even after enduring for a very long time. Survival into the present is not the only measure of importance. We are here, but that does not mean every vanished human was only a mistake on the way to us. This view makes the human past more humbling. The body we live in is not the final proof that history was always moving toward us. It is the body of the branch that remained. Other branches once carried breath, warmth, hunger, attention, and social life. Their bodies were real solutions, even if those solutions did not last forever. To see them this way is not to blur the differences between species or populations. Differences matter. They are exactly what make the story rich. But difference does not require ranking. It requires context. A body must be read with its land, its climate, its food, its tools, its group, and its time. Only then does the question of the mysterious humans before us become large enough. They were not half-formed shadows waiting for modern humanity to complete them. They were living forms of the human family, each shaped by the earth in a different way, each showing that the word human once had more shapes than the one that looks back at us now. A stone tool is one of the quietest objects in the human past, but it can change the whole feeling of a vanished life. At first, it may look like only a broken rock. Its edge is still. Its maker is gone. It carries no face, no name, no clear memory of the hand that struck it. Yet when the shape is not random, when the flake has been removed with direction, when a pattern repeats across a place or a time, the stone begins to speak in its own slow way. It tells us that an ancient human looked at the world not only as something to endure, but as something that could be altered. A sharp edge could be made where no edge existed before. A heavy core could become a source of cutting surfaces. A hand, a stone, and a need met each other, and from that meeting came a trace that could outlast flesh by hundreds of thousands of years. This is why tools matter so deeply when we ask who the mysterious humans before us were. Bones show bodies, tools show contact between bodies and problems. Near the beginning of our own story, tool-making did not belong only to modern people. Earlier human relatives made and used stone tools long before writing, cities, farming, or metal. Different tool traditions appeared in different places and periods, and their details are studied carefully, not because stone itself is mysterious, but because repetition suggests learning. A tool must be held, a blow must be aimed, material must be chosen. The maker has to understand, at least through practice, how stone breaks. That knowledge may not have been spoken in words as we know them. It may have passed through watching, imitation, gesture, correction, and long familiarity. But however it passed, it left patterns. One edge resembles another. One method appears again. One landscape gives up stones shaped in ways that nature alone is unlikely to produce. The tool becomes a small fossil of behavior. It does not reveal the whole mind, but it shows that the mind and hand were working inside a world of need. A cutting tool can suggest food processing, but food itself rarely survives. A scraper may suggest working hide or wood, but the hide and wood may be gone. A point may suggest hunting or cutting, but the exact moment of use is often lost. This is the strange imbalance of archaeology. The hardest materials remain while the softest parts of life disappear. Stone stays. Fire sometimes leaves ash, charcoal, heated sediment, or altered bone. Wood, skin, fibre, baskets, cords, sleeping places, and spoken teaching usually vanish. Because of this, the world of earlier humans can appear more stone-filled than it really was. Their lives were not made only of rocks. They lived among plants, animals, water, bodies, sounds, and weather. But stone tools remain because stone is patient. It can lie under sediment long after the people who made it have returned to earth. Fire, when preserved clearly, adds another layer. It hints at warmth, light, food processing, protection, gathering, and the changing meaning of night. For some ancient human groups, evidence of fire use is strong. For others, it is more debated or uneven. The honest story has to follow the evidence site by site. But the importance of fire itself is easy to understand. Darkness is different when there is flame. Cold is different when there is heat. Food can be different when it is cooked. A place can feel different when a group gathers around a center of light. In the deep human beginning, tools and fire did not simply make life easier. They changed the boundary between the body and the environment. They allowed ancient humans to meet the world with something more than teeth, hands, and muscle alone. Still, these traces should not be made to say too much. A stone tool does not prove language. A hearth does not prove ritual. A repeated sight does not tell us every social rule. The evidence is powerful because it is limited and real. It gives us action without autobiography. It lets us see that someone returned, struck, cut, burned, carried, or learned, but not what they called those acts in their own minds. The mysterious humans before us become more vivid here, not because we can hear them speak, but because their hands left work behind. A shaped stone on old ground is a small meeting place between their vanished body and our living curiosity. It is enough to show that they were not passive creatures in a hostile world. They changed matter, they made edges, they carried knowledge in practice. And through those quiet objects, their lost lives still press gently against the surface of history. A stone tool is not only a useful object, it is also a trace of learning. This may be the most important thing it tells us about the mysterious humans who lived before us. A sharp edge can cut meat, scrape hide, work wood, open a carcass, or help prepare food. But the edge did not make itself. Someone had to know, through experience, which stone might break well. Someone had to strike it with force at a workable angle. Someone had to recognize when the result was useful and when it failed. If the same kinds of tools appear again and again, across a site or across many layers of time, then we are not looking only at individual accidents. We may be looking at habits that were repeated, remembered, and passed on. Near the beginning of our own story, this is where technology becomes more than survival equipment. It becomes social memory made visible. A tool tradition can outlive the person who first learned it. One generation watches another. A young individual sees how a core is held, how the blow is aimed, how a flake is chosen, how a dull edge is replaced. The teaching may not have sounded like modern teaching. We should not assume spoken explanation in the way we use it now. It may have been slower, physical, and close. Watching hands, copying movement, failing, trying again, being corrected by the result itself or by another body nearby. But whatever the exact form, repeated tool-making suggests that knowledge did not begin from nothing each morning. It accumulated in small patterns. That is a deep human act. Not uniquely modern, not necessarily symbolic in the richest sense, but deeply connected to what later became central to us. Learning from others so that the world becomes less unknown. This is why a stone flake in ancient ground can feel almost intimate. It does not show emotion, but it shows attention. It tells us that a being once noticed the difference between raw stone and shaped stone, between an edge that worked and an edge that did not. The mysterious humans before us lived in environments where such differences mattered. A successful cut could change access to food. A well-made scraper could change how a hide was prepared. A carried tool could mean that a solution travelled with the group instead of being found again by chance. In a world of shifting climate, uncertain meals, and fragile bodies, repeated skill was not decoration. It was part of endurance. Yet tools also warn us against exaggeration. Archaeologists can often study how a tool was made, what material was used, where it was found, and sometimes what wear marks suggest about its use. But a tool does not tell us exactly what its maker thought. It does not reveal whether the action was accompanied by words, gestures, quiet focus, or social rules. It does not tell us whether the maker felt pride, frustration, boredom, hunger, or urgency. The tool shows behavior, not inner life. Still, behavior matters. If bones tell us what bodies could do, tools tell us what bodies actually did to the world. They show repeated contact between hand, mind, and material. They show that ancient humans were not simply moving through landscapes as passive creatures. They were selecting, shaping, carrying, returning, and reusing. They were building small forms of reliability in a world that was not reliable. This links directly back to the deep origin of humanity. Before houses, before fields, before written memory, before any person could leave a name carved in stone, knowledge lived in bodies and actions. It lived in the hand that remembered a strike, in the eye that knew a good stone, in the group that returned to a useful place, in the repeated movement that made one generation less helpless than the last. The earliest human world may have been poor in permanent objects compared with our own, but it was not empty of intelligence. Its intelligence was often practical, local, and perishable. The stone survived. The teaching voice did not. The edge remained. The day of use disappeared. The pattern endured while the people vanished. So when we ask who the mysterious humans before us were, tools give a careful answer. They were beings whose minds touched the world through hands, whose survival depended not only on bodies but on learned action, and whose vanished thoughts still leave faint shapes in stone. A tool can show that a hand acted, but it cannot show the whole mind behind the hand. This is the quiet limit we have to accept when we follow the mysterious humans before us through stone, fire, and shelter. A flake with a sharp edge can tell us that someone broke stone in a useful way. A hearth can suggest heat, light, and repeated use of a place. Cut marks on animal bone can point toward butchery or food processing. A cluster of artifacts can suggest a camp, a working area, or a place returned to more than once, but none of these traces becomes a diary. The stone does not explain why the group stayed there. The ash does not tell us what was felt in the dark. The cut bone does not reveal whether the food was shared gently, urgently, or under pressure. Evidence gives action, but not the full experience of action. Near the beginning of our own story, this distinction is essential. We want to know whether earlier humans thought like us, taught like us, planned like us, feared like us, or cared like us. The material record can sometimes suggest complexity, but it cannot answer every inner question. A well-made tool may require skill and foresight, yet it does not prove modern language. A repeated hearth may suggest gathering, but not the meaning of gathering. A sheltered place may suggest safety, but not the social rules of the group. This does not make the evidence weak, it makes it honest. The lives of earlier humans were lived in full, but the traces they left behind are partial. What survives best is often what was hardest. Stone, burnt material, bone, teeth, and sediment. What vanishes first is often what would tell us most about daily life. Voice, gesture, memory, emotion, trust, teaching, conflict, and the small habits that made a group feel like a group. A stone tool, therefore, is both close and far. It is close because it was held by a real hand. It is far because the hand's world is gone. We can see repeated technique, but not the moment of learning. We can see a cutting edge, but not the hunger before it was used. We can see the remains of fire, but not the comfort or worry around it. The mysterious humans before us become most real when we allow that incompleteness to remain. Their tools are not proof that they were exactly like us, and they are not proof that they were simple. They are proof of practiced interaction with the physical world. They show that ancient humans were responding to problems with learned behavior. They show that survival was not only biological but also practical and social. To make a tool is one act. To keep making tools across generations is something deeper. It means that knowledge found a way to move from one body to another, even if that movement was silent, slow, and physical. Still, there are boundaries. Archaeology can tell us where objects were found, what they were made from, how old they may be, how they were shaped, and sometimes how they were used. It can compare sites and patterns. It can show change over time. But it cannot always reveal intention. Two similar objects may have had different uses. A place with tools may not have been occupied in the way we first imagine. Fire may come from human use in one context and natural burning in another, unless the evidence is clear. Good interpretation depends on context, and context can be damaged, mixed, or missing. This is why a careful story must resist filling every gap. The gaps are part of the truth. When we think of origin, we often search for a moment when humanity began to think, plan, or imagine. But the evidence of tools suggests something slower. Human-like intelligence did not appear as a single light suddenly switched on. It gathered through hands, mistakes, repetition, attention, and memory. It lived in the body before it lived in writing. It lived in a sharp edge before it lived in a city wall. It lived in the remembered place where the right stone could be found, the remembered motion that made the stone split, the remembered shelter that gave protection when night came. The mysterious humans before us left us these hard, quiet marks, and the marks tell us something precious. Their minds touch the world, but the full shape of those minds remains beyond us. That is not a failure of the story. It is the reason the story remains alive. Homo sapiens did not enter an empty world. That may be one of the most important ideas in the whole story. When we imagine our species spreading across the earth, it is easy to picture a human figure walking into silence, as if forests, caves, coastlines, and river valleys were waiting for us alone. But deep history was not so empty. In some regions and during some periods, our ancestors moved through landscapes where other human populations already had their own long histories. Neanderthals were present across parts of Europe and Western Asia. Denisovan-related groups appear through genetic evidence across parts of Asia. Other human relatives had lived in earlier times, and some may have overlapped with our ancestors in ways the evidence can only partly reveal. The human world before us was not a single campfire. It was several fires, some near, some distant, some burning in places we can barely find. Near the beginning of our own story, this changes the meaning of migration. A migration is not only movement across land, it is movement into existing ecologies, existing animal communities, existing paths, existing dangers, and sometimes existing human worlds. When Homo sapiens groups expanded beyond Africa, they did not simply carry modern humanity into a blank map. They entered a planet already shaped by earlier human occupation. Some meetings may have happened directly. Some groups may have avoided one another. Some may have used similar landscapes at different times without ever seeing each other. Some encounters may have involved exchange, conflict, curiosity, fear, or interbreeding. We have to say may, because the evidence rarely gives us the meeting itself. It gives us traces afterward, bones in regions that overlap in time, tools that can be compared, and genomes that show ancient mixture. The genetic evidence is especially powerful because it proves that, in at least some cases, the boundary between Homo sapiens and other human groups was not absolute. Neanderthal ancestry in many living people outside Africa, and Denisovan-related ancestry in some populations show that contact was not only geographic, it became biological. Yet this truth should not be turned into a simple romance or a simple battle. Interbreeding tells us that lineages met closely enough to produce descendants, but it does not tell us the social meaning of those meetings. It does not tell us whether they were rare or common in any one region, welcomed or resisted, peaceful or tense, remembered or forgotten. Genes can carry evidence without carrying memory. That is one of the strangest parts of the mysterious humans before us. Their presence can remain in the living body after their stories have vanished completely. The wider human past may have included many kinds of contact. Two groups might have watched the same animals from opposite slopes. They might have followed the same river during different seasons. They might have used similar shelters centuries apart, leaving layers that later archaeologists would separate. They might have met at the edge of a valley and moved away. They might have learned nothing from one another, or something practical, or something we cannot detect at all. The material record can rarely show the emotional texture of an encounter. A stone tool tradition changing in a region may suggest influence, movement, or replacement, but such patterns are difficult to interpret and often debated. A bone with ancestry signals may show mixture, but not a scene. This is why the idea of different human groups meeting should remain quiet and careful. It is not a movie scene. It is a long historical condition spread across many places and times. What matters most is that our species became itself within a world where other humans had also been living. We were not the only experiment. We were not the only hands shaping stone. We were not the only bodies needing warmth, food, and shelter. When different human forms came near one another, the meaning of being human became more complicated. The question was no longer only where we came from, but who else was already there, and what happened when the last surviving branch met branches that would not survive as separate populations. In that meeting, whether direct, indirect, rare, repeated, peaceful, or harsh, the loneliness of modern humanity had not yet begun. There were still other human faces in the world, and the earth had not yet narrowed to only us. When different human groups came near one another, the meeting did not have to look like one clear scene. It may not have been a dramatic encounter across an open plain, with two groups stopping to stare. Deep time rarely gives us scenes that clean. Contact could have been slow, indirect, scattered, and repeated across generations. One group might have used a valley during colder months, another during warmer months. One might have followed herds along a river, while another kept to shelters higher in the hills. They might have shared a landscape without sharing a day. They might have crossed the same ground years apart, leaving stone tools in layers that now sit close together but once belonged to separated moments. Or, in some cases, they may have met directly, close enough for bodies, food, tools, fear and curiosity to matter. Near the beginning of our own story, this makes the world feel much less simple. The mysterious humans before us were not only predecessors. Some were neighbours in the broadest sense, neighbours across regions, across seasons, across ecological boundaries, and sometimes perhaps across the small distance between two living groups. Avoidance may have been as important as contact. In a world where food was uncertain and groups were small, strangers could mean danger. A different human group might be seen as competition for animals, water, shelter, stone sources, or safe places to sleep. Moving away may have been safer than approaching, but avoidance still creates a relationship. It shapes routes. It changes where people camp. It leaves one valley quiet and another occupied. It can turn the landscape into a map of caution. Competition may also have existed, especially where groups depended on similar resources. Yet competition does not always mean open violence. It can mean pressure over time. One group using better locations, one population growing while another remains small, one set of strategies fitting a changing climate more successfully than another. In other cases, contact may have involved learning or observation. A tool form, a way of using a material, a route through difficult terrain, or knowledge of a resource might pass between groups, though proving such transfer is difficult. Archaeologists can compare tool traditions and changes in material culture, but influence, independent invention, migration, and replacement can look similar in the ground. This is why careful language matters. The evidence often gives patterns, not conversations. Interbreeding gives another kind of pattern. Ancient DNA shows that some Homo sapiens ancestors had children with Neanderthals and Denisovan-related groups. That means contact was not only distant coexistence, At least sometimes it crossed into family lines. But even here, the truth remains both intimate and silent. Genetic mixture can happen through many social circumstances, and the genome does not tell us the human story around it. It cannot show whether two groups understood one another as similar, strange, threatening, desirable, or simply present. It cannot show the language of gesture, the first moments of approach, the role of children, the movement of individuals between groups, or the later memory of those events. The body keeps the result, but not the story. This is one of the quietest losses in human history. Some of the mysterious humans before us are still present in living DNA, yet the meetings that allowed that presence are beyond recall. The earth gives us bones. Genetics gives us traces of inheritance. Tools give us patterned action. But the social world where different humans recognized, avoided, competed with, learned from, or joined one another has mostly vanished. We should not fill that world with easy stories of war or harmony. Both may have happened in different places and times, along with many other forms of contact too ordinary, or too brief to leave a clear mark. A meeting could be tense. It could be practical. It could be accidental. It could lead to nothing. It could change ancestry forever. The larger point is that Homo sapiens became part of a human landscape before becoming the only human landscape. Our ancestors did not simply replace silence with history. They moved through a world where other human lives had already been shaped by cold, islands, caves, mountains, tools, hunger, and memory. When these human worlds came near one another, the result was not one simple outcome. It was a field of possibilities: avoidance, pressure, learning, mixture, disappearance, and survival. Somewhere inside that field, the human family narrowed. But before it narrowed, it was crowded enough that the word stranger may once have applied not only to another tribe of our own species, but to another kind of human being entirely. The closest evidence of contact between ancient human groups may not sit in a cave or on the ground. It may sit quietly inside the bodies of people alive today. This is a strange thought, because it means that some of the mysterious humans before us did not disappear only into stone and sediment. A small part of them passed through children, then through generations, then through populations that moved, divided, and mixed again. Neanderthal ancestry in many living people outside Africa, and Denisovan-related ancestry in some populations of Asia and Oceania, show that the boundary between Homo sapiens and other human groups was crossed in the past. This does not mean the groups were the same. It means that the human family at certain times and places was close enough for inheritance to move between branches. Near the beginning of our own story, this makes the idea of us more layered than it first appears. We are not pure witnesses standing outside the vanished world. Some of that vanished world is faintly woven into later humanity. But genetics should be handled carefully because it can easily create the illusion of a complete story. A trace of ancestry is not a memory. It does not tell us the name of a person, the face of a mother, the fear of a stranger, or the place where a child was born between worlds. It tells us that contact happened and that descendants carried part of the result forward. Everything else must be approached with caution. Still, the fact itself is powerful. For a long time, many people imagined the disappearance of Neanderthals and other ancient humans as a clean replacement. One group leaving, another arriving, the old world closing, the new world beginning. The genetic record makes the picture softer and more complicated. Some lineages ended as separate populations, but parts of their ancestry continued. Some boundaries dissolved into later groups. Some disappearances may have included absorption as well as loss. This does not remove tragedy or mystery. In some ways, it deepens both. A population can vanish as a living people while still leaving biological traces in others. The fire goes out in one place, but a small ember is carried unknowingly into another. This changes how we think about the mysterious humans before us. They were not only before us in time, in limited and uneven ways, some were also behind us in ancestry. Their closeness is not always visible in the mirror, and it should not be exaggerated into simple identity. A person with a small amount of Neanderthal ancestry is not a Neanderthal. A population with Denisovan-related genetic contributions is not Denisovan. But these traces remind us that human history was not sealed into separate rooms. It had doorways. Some doorways opened briefly. Some opened more than once. Some led to children whose descendants survived long after one parent population disappeared. At the same time, many meetings may have left no genetic trace at all. A group can encounter another and avoid them. It can compete without mixing. It can learn something and leave no obvious biological mark. It can disappear before any trace reaches the present. Genetics illuminates one kind of contact, but not all contact. Archaeology illuminates another. Bones illuminate another. Each source gives a different angle, and none gives the whole world. That is why the human past remains so difficult to close. When our ancestors met other humans, they entered relationships that could shape bodies, tools, territories, and futures. But most of the meanings of those relationships have vanished. The modern loneliness of Homo sapiens can make us forget that there was once a time when human difference was not only cultural or linguistic. It could be anatomical, genetic, evolutionary, and still close enough to touch. This is the quiet center of the story. The mysterious humans before us were not always remote fossils from a distant age. Some stood near enough to our ancestors that the later human body still carries traces of them. The world became a world of one surviving human species, but it did not become pure, simple, or separate. It carried the past forward in hidden ways. And when we ask who lived before us, the answer is not only under the earth. A small part of the answer has been travelling inside humanity all along. When we ask why the mysterious humans before us disappeared, it is tempting to search for one clean answer. We want a single cause because a single cause feels easier to hold. One group was stronger. One climate changed. One competition ended the story. One event closed the door. But deep history rarely behaves that neatly. Populations do not usually vanish because of one pressure alone. They live inside many pressures at once: climate, food, birth rates, disease, injury, migration, competition, isolation, and chance. A group may survive one hard season, then another, until the balance becomes too thin. A small population may lose members faster than it can replace them. A changing environment may move animals away from familiar routes. A shelter once useful may become less reliable. A cold phase, a dry phase, or a series of unstable years may make old strategies weaker. Near the beginning of our own story, survival was not guaranteed by being intelligent, strong, or well adapted in one moment. Survival had to be renewed again and again. This is why the disappearance of earlier human groups should not be told like a simple victory story for Homo sapiens. Our species survived, but survival does not automatically mean that every vanished group was inferior. Neanderthals, for example, lived for a very long time in demanding environments. Homo erectus, or closely related populations, endured across immense spans of time. Homo floresiensis appears to have lived in an island world with its own pressures. Denisovan-related groups left traces in later ancestry, even if their own bodies remain hard to see. These were not empty forms waiting to fail. They were human populations that met their world successfully for as long as they could. Their disappearance may have involved climate shifts, changing habitats, small numbers, limited ranges, competition with expanding Homo sapiens groups, interbreeding, or combinations of these factors. Different groups may have disappeared for different reasons. Even within one group, the causes may have varied from region to region. A population in a cold valley could face different pressures from one near a forest edge or coastline. An isolated island population could be vulnerable in ways a continental population was not. A small group with little contact beyond its own range could be more fragile when conditions changed. This is where the mystery becomes more serious. Extinction is not always dramatic. It can be quiet. It can happen as fewer children survive, as groups become separated, as old roots fail, as injuries matter more because there are fewer helpers, as neighbouring populations expand, as familiar animals move away, as births decline, as deaths accumulate, and as small groups merge into others or vanish from the record. The end of a human population may not leave a final battlefield or a last campfire. It may leave only fewer bones in later layers, a fading tool tradition, a genetic trace absorbed elsewhere, or nothing clear at all. We should be careful when imagining Homo sapiens as simply replacing everyone through direct conflict. Conflict may have happened in some times and places, as it has in many human histories, but it is not the only possible explanation and often not the easiest to prove. Competition can be indirect. Larger networks can matter. Wider exchange of materials, mates, or information can make one population more resilient than another. A species spread across many regions may recover from local losses better than a small, scattered group. Social networks, mobility, flexible diets, and demographic size may have played roles in the success of Homo sapiens, but even those ideas require careful evidence and should not be turned into one grand answer. The mysterious humans before us disappeared into a world of interacting causes. Their endings were likely as varied as their lives. Some may have been absorbed through interbreeding. Some may have declined as environments changed. Some may have been pushed into smaller ranges. Some may have simply left too little evidence for us to follow their final generations. When we ask why they vanished and we remained, the honest beginning is not a triumphal answer. It is a quieter recognition. The human family narrowed through climate, bodies, numbers, contact, and chance, and no single sentence can hold all the losses. Disappearance does not always mean a clean ending. This is one of the hardest ideas to hold, because our minds prefer borders. We imagine a group alive, then gone, a species present, then absent, a fire burning, then extinguished. But the human past may have narrowed in a more complicated way. Some ancient human populations may have declined until no separate community remained, while parts of their ancestry continued inside other populations. Neanderthals are the clearest example in public understanding. They disappeared as a distinct population, yet small amounts of Neanderthal ancestry remain in many living people outside Africa. Denisovan-related groups are even harder to picture, but their genetic traces also survive in some modern populations. This means that the end of a human group was not always the same as total erasure. Sometimes the separate branch ended, but some inheritance flowed into another branch before the end came. Near the beginning of our own story, that makes the word vanished more delicate. A population can vanish from the world of living faces, tools, camps, and continuity, yet not vanish completely from biological history. The loss is still real. A genetic trace is not a culture. It is not a voice. It is not the memory of a place or the knowledge of how a group lived through winter. It does not preserve a language, a relationship to land, a way of teaching children, or the feeling of being part of that vanished population. When a people disappear as a living group, an entire world of experience closes. Even if fragments of ancestry remain, the social life that carried that ancestry is gone. This is why interbreeding should not be told as if it solves the mystery of disappearance. It complicates the mystery. It shows that some endings were partial, blurred, and uneven, but it does not restore the lives that ended. The difference matters. If a small Neanderthal contribution remains in a modern genome, that does not mean Neanderthals are still here in any ordinary sense. It means that some ancient encounters left descendants, and those descendants became part of later human populations. The original communities, their own histories, their own ways of surviving, no longer continue as distinct human worlds. The same caution applies to Denisovan-related ancestry. It can tell us that contact occurred, and in some cases that inherited variants later mattered in particular environments, but it cannot show the full population that carried those variants first. Absorption is not survival in the complete sense. It is a kind of echo. It carries something forward while leaving almost everything else behind. This view also helps us understand why the disappearance of earlier humans may have varied across regions. In one place, a group may have declined because climate changed and food sources shifted. In another, it may have been absorbed into expanding Homo sapiens groups. Somewhere else, small population size may have made survival fragile before any direct contact mattered. On an island, isolation could make a lineage vulnerable to environmental disruption. In a cold region, repeated climate swings could reduce habitat or prey. In a large continental zone, several pressures could overlap slowly until the separate identity of a population faded. Deep history does not give us one ending repeated everywhere. It gives us many endings, some visible, some hidden, some biological, some archaeological, and some beyond recovery. The mysterious humans before us become more human when we imagine these endings quietly. Not as one dramatic collapse, but as a narrowing of possibilities. Fewer children, fewer groups, fewer safe places, more movement, more contact, more mixing, less continuity. A tool tradition appears less often. A body type no longer appears in later layers. A genetic line becomes thin, then scattered into other populations. A cave that once held evidence of one human form falls silent. The world does not announce the final generation. The last members of a disappearing population may not know they are the last. They may only know hunger, weather, children, fatigue, fear, and the next decision. That thought brings us back to the beginning of the whole question. The mysterious humans who lived before us were not only vanished species on a chart, they were living groups whose futures narrowed for reasons that were probably many and uneven. Some were erased by time. Some were absorbed in part. Some remain only through bones. Some remain through molecules. Some may remain in no readable form at all. To say they disappeared is true, but it is not the whole truth. The deeper truth is that the human family became one surviving species through a long process of loss, mixture, chance, and silence. The question is not simply why they vanished. It is why so many ways of being human became quiet while one way remained. That is a harder question, and it should not be answered with pride. Homo sapiens survived, spread, and eventually became the only living human species. But that outcome was not written into the beginning. There was no law of nature promising that our branch would be the last one standing. Earlier humans had already endured cold, distance, hunger, isolation, and change. Some existed for immense spans of time. Some adapted to places our ancestors may have entered much later. Some met us closely enough to leave genetic traces. The narrowing of the human family was not the simple triumph of intelligence over weakness. It was more likely the result of many pressures working through many regions, with different outcomes unfolding at different speeds. Near the deep root of our story, this should make us cautious about the word success. A species can survive into the present and still owe part of that survival to timing, population size, mobility, networks, fertility, climate, geography, and chance. A vanished species can be gone and still have been successful for a very long time. Neanderthals were not unsuccessful because they are no longer here. Homo erectus was not unsuccessful because it did not become us in a direct, simple way. Homo floresiensis was not meaningless because its world ended. Denisovan-related groups were not unreal because their bodies are hard to picture. Each of them shows that evolution produces lives, not rankings. The fact that only one human species remains may say as much about fragility as superiority. Small populations are fragile. Local populations are fragile. Isolated populations are fragile. A group that depends on a narrow range of habitats may suffer when those habitats shift. A group with fewer connections may have fewer chances to recover after loss. A group that meets expanding populations may face pressure without a single battle ever deciding anything. The disappearance of earlier humans may have been made of countless small moments that no fossil can show. A child not surviving a winter, a group failing to find enough food, a migration route closing, a mating network shrinking, a familiar valley no longer supporting the same animals, a neighbouring group growing while another slowly thins. History remembers battles because they are visible. Deep time often works through numbers, weather, births, and empty places. That is why the vanished humans before us should not be turned into defeated characters in our story. They had their own histories before our arrival mattered to them, if it ever did. Some may have known Homo sapiens directly, others may have disappeared before or far from direct contact. Some may have merged partly into our ancestors, some may have left no descendants, some may still be hidden behind names we have not yet discovered. To ask why we remained is therefore also to ask why the evidence remains uneven, why some populations became visible to science and others did not, why one branch expanded while others narrowed, and why survival in evolution is never guaranteed to the most familiar form. The deeper lesson is that humanity was once plural, not plural only in culture, language, or appearance, but plural in species and lineages. The modern world has made that hard to feel. Every person alive today belongs to the same species, and this can make our form seem inevitable. But the fossils, tools, caves, islands, and genetic traces say otherwise. They show a world where human life had several faces, several bodies, several local answers to the same old demands of Earth. Then, gradually, those answers disappeared as separate living worlds. Some went silent in bone. Some went silent in DNA except for faint traces. Some may have gone silent without even a name. When we ask who the mysterious humans before us were, we are also asking what it means that they are not here to answer. Their absence is part of our identity. We live after a narrowing. We are the only surviving branch, but not the whole tree that once grew. That realization does not diminish us. It makes our story more careful, more humble, and more awake to loss. The human past is not only the path that led to us, it is also the many paths that ended before they could tell us what they had been. Now we can look back across the long path without trying to close it too soon. The mysterious humans who lived before us do not form one simple group. They appear as many different traces scattered across time, a robust Neanderthal body shaped by cold and hard landscapes, a Denisovan genetic signal almost invisible without ancient DNA, a small human form on Flores that unsettles our idea of progress, a Homo naledi body found in deep cave darkness, a long Homo erectus shadow crossing great spans of time and land. Each trace changes the question a little. Together they make the human beginning feel wider, older, and less lonely than the world we know today. Before us, there were other ways for a human relative to stand upright, use hands, find food, endure night, and leave marks behind. Some were close enough to share ancestry with living people. Some were distant enough to feel almost beyond imagination. Some are known through many bones. Some through only a few remains. Some through molecules that survived when faces did not. Near the root of our story, this variety matters because it shows that humanity was not born as one final shape. It emerged through branches, environments, accidents, survivals, mixtures, and losses. We have followed bones, tools, caves, islands, bodies, and DNA, but each kind of evidence has its own silence. Bones can give shape, but not voice. Tools can show action, but not thought in full. Fire can suggest warmth and gathering, but not the meaning of a night. A cave can preserve remains, but not always intention. DNA can reveal contact, but not memory. This is the quiet discipline of looking back honestly. The past becomes more powerful when we do not pretend to know what cannot yet be known. The mysterious humans before us do not need invented secrets to matter. Their real existence is already enough. They walked on the same earth, though often under different skies, climates and coastlines. They faced hunger without farms, darkness without electric light, injury without medicine, and danger without the protections that surround most modern lives. Their bodies carried the old contract between life and land more directly than ours usually do now. A cold valley, a dry season, a shrinking animal range, a difficult birth, a healed bone, a tool edge, a cave entrance, a path to water. These were not background details. They were the material of existence. When we imagine them this way, not as monsters, not as missing links, not as lesser versions of ourselves, they become more human in the broad and careful sense. They become populations living under pressure, each shaped by its own world. The educational value of their story is not only that we learn names like Neanderthal, Denisovan, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, or Homo naledi. The deeper value is that we learn humility about our own place in time. We are the only human species left, but we are not the only human form that ever mattered. The modern world makes our survival look obvious because we see only the result. But the result was not obvious at the beginning. It came after many branches ended, merged or disappeared from the record. It came after climates shifted, populations moved, and evidence survived unevenly. It came after long stretches of life that left no story, only fragments. To look at those fragments with care is to understand that our own existence is not separate from loss. We are not standing at the top of a ladder. We are standing at the living edge of a tree whose other branches have gone silent. That does not make the human story darker. It makes it more honest. It asks us to treat the past not as a simple march toward us, but as a field of lives that were real before they were evidence. The mysterious humans before us are gone in the ordinary sense, but the question they leave behind remains calm and deep. What does it mean to be the last human branch still awake under the night sky? The lesson left by the mysterious humans before us is not that we are small in a meaningless universe. It is that we are part of a much older, more fragile, and more crowded story than the one modern life allows us to feel. Every night, when a person lies down in a safe room, with walls, light, stored food, medicine, clothing, and a world of human voices nearby, it is easy to forget how recent that safety is. For most of the human journey, survival was closer to the skin. Bodies had to meet cold, heat, hunger, injury, darkness, and distance without the layers that now protect us. The humans before us lived inside that older contact with the earth. They did not ask to become lessons. They did not know that one day their teeth, bones, tools, and genetic traces would help another human species think more carefully about itself. They simply lived. That is what gives their story its value. It turns prehistory away from a ranking of winners and losers and toward a quieter understanding of life under pressure. Near the root of our own beginning, no human form was guaranteed a future. Not Neanderthals in their cold landscapes. Not Denisovan-related populations hidden mostly in inheritance. Not Homo floresiensis on an island. Not Homo naledi in the puzzling darkness of cave evidence. Not even Homo sapiens. Our survival looks inevitable only because we are looking backward from inside it. But the deeper record suggests something less proud and more honest. Human life continued where bodies, groups, environments, and chance held together long enough for another generation to be born. That is a powerful educational message because it changes the way we understand ourselves. We are not separate from the vanished humans before us. We are related to some compared with others, shaped by the same broad forces and surrounded by the same planet that once tested them. The modern mind often wants certainty, identity, and clear borders, but the human past gives us blurred edges. It gives us branches, mixtures, extinctions, partial survivals, and long silences. It teaches that being human was never only about intelligence. It was also about vulnerability, a child needing care, a body needing warmth, a group needing trust, a memory of water, a hand learning stone, a wound healing slowly, a small population facing a climate shift it could not control. These are not minor details beneath the great story. They are the great story. The mysterious humans before us make that clear because their lives were real even when their names are gone. Their value does not depend on how much they resembled us. It does not depend on whether they made art like ours, spoke like us, or imagined the world in ways we would recognize. They matter because they show that the human family once held many forms of endurance. Some forms lasted astonishingly long. Some left only a few bones. Some left traces inside later people. Some may still be unknown. Looking at them honestly can make us less arrogant, but also more careful with the present. If the human story narrowed once, it reminds us that survival is never automatic. Populations depend on environments. Communities depend on care. Knowledge depends on being passed on. The future depends on conditions we often take for granted. This does not need to become fear. It can become attention. The vanished humans before us teach a calm kind of responsibility, to value evidence, to respect uncertainty, to avoid turning the past into fantasy, and to understand that human life has always been carried by fragile bodies in fragile worlds. Their disappearance does not only tell us what was lost, it helps us see what remains. We remain with memory, science, questions, and the ability to look back without pretending the past was simple. We remain with the responsibility to hold the story gently, because those who came before us can no longer correct us. If there is a final lesson before the last question, it may be this: being the only humans left should not make us feel chosen above all others. It should make us feel awake to how rare, temporary, and dependent every human world has always been. Perhaps the quietest truth in this whole story is that the vanished humans before us were not waiting to be discovered. They did not live as evidence. They did not live as ancestors, cousins, branches, specimens, or names in a scientific chart. They lived from one day into the next, as all living beings do, A Neanderthal did not know that one day a modern person would study the shape of a brow or the curve of a bone. A Denisovan-related person did not know that a small trace of inheritance might pass through generations long after their own people were gone. A small human on Flores did not know that their body would challenge the modern idea of progress. A Homo naledi individual did not know that bones in darkness would become a question about the limits of our understanding. A Homo erectus group crossing old ground did not know that their long endurance would become a shadow at the beginning of the human road. They were not symbols first. They were lives first. That is the final place where the story should rest, softly and without false certainty. Near the deep beginning of humanity, before writing, before cities, before remembered names, many human forms met the earth in their own way. Some walked far, some stayed local, some endured cold. Some lived on islands, some left genetic traces. Some left stone tools, teeth, skull fragments, cave bones, hearths, or almost nothing at all. Their worlds were not ours, but they were not empty. There were bodies needing warmth. There were children needing care. There were injuries, migrations, shelters, hunger, learning, and nights that had to be survived. We cannot know how they understood themselves. We cannot know whether they felt a boundary between their own kind and other humans in a way we would recognize. We cannot know the stories they may have carried, if stories in any form existed among them. The most honest ending is not to pretend that the silence has been solved. It is to let the silence remain, and to understand why it matters. We are the only living human species now, and that fact can make the world feel as if it was always meant to become this way. But the evidence says something quieter. It says that our aloneness is recent in the scale of deep time. It says that the word human once had more than one living shape. It says that survival was never guaranteed, and that the branch still alive today carries both success and loss. This does not need to frighten us. It can steady us. It can make the present feel less like a throne and more like a responsibility. We inherit not only our own species' story, but also the task of remembering that other human worlds once existed without written memory, without monuments, and without anyone left to speak from inside them. To look back carefully is a form of respect. To avoid exaggeration is a form of respect. To admit uncertainty is a form of respect. The mysterious humans before us remind us that knowledge does not have to erase wonder. Sometimes the truest wonder comes from knowing exactly how little remains and still understanding that what remains is enough to change us. A tooth, a tool, a bone, a fragment of DNA, a cave chamber, an island skeleton, a cold valley, a long migration route. Each one is small, but together they widen the human story. They tell us that we are not the first answer Earth gave to the problem of becoming human-like. Only the last answer still speaking. And if those other humans once walked, endured, learned, touched, feared, rested and disappeared beneath the same sky that now covers us, what should it mean to be the only humans left to remember them?